Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1451 of the War News stream. And tonight we've got some very big developments happening in Iran. We are hearing that U.S. forces have announced that they're preparing for a massive multi-week-long attack on Iran, not just a single attack, but multi-week attacks on major cities. Also, we're hearing that currently tonight there's been major air defense fire erupting in Isfahan, Iran. And also, in addition to that, there's been major explosions that have struck Cuba's largest oil refinery tonight, and we have very big news, and it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of major news from around the world, as we have been able to get significant developments from the Middle East, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, the Eastern Caribbean, the Central Caribbean, and also the United States of America over the past 24 hours. Inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran, it has become clear that the situation is becoming incredibly strenuous, as significant amounts and heavy volumes of air defense fire have been reported around the area of Isfahan, as air defense drills are being conducted on the near regular daily basis at this point throughout major cities inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. This comes as U.S. airlifts are still being conducted into the area of the Middle East, with significant U.S. air flights and airlifts being seen from EUCOM's area of responsibility and also from NORTHCOM's area of responsibility, which encompasses the United States of America. We have seen that this buildup is continuing, as the U.S. Department of Defense has stated that they are currently drawing up plans to conduct a multi-week-long airstrike campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran, which, if ever used, will largely look for the complete destruction of the Iranian armed forces and government apparatus, which are used to currently conduct the Islamic Republic's operations within the territorial borders of Iran. Still, while this planning is being conducted and tensions are riding wildly high, the Department of Defense and the U.S. government is still looking at trying to negotiate with the Islamic Republic of Iran, much to the dismay of many, as it does appear that we are still going to be conducting another round of talks in 5 days on the 17th of February of this year. It seems as though the Islamic Republic of Iran Iran is already largely torpedoing those talks, as they have openly stated that they will not be negotiating with the United States of America about any of their missile programs whatsoever. And while nuclear talks may be on the table, they are not willing to make the kind of concessions that will lead to the complete end of their nuclear enrichment programs, which are a significant national security concern not only to the United States, but our Middle Eastern partners throughout the region. The United States currently does have a large deployment of forces within the area, and it has been announced officially today that the USS Gerald R Ford is going to be arriving within CENTCOM Command, meaning that its 8-month-long deployment will now be extended most likely by several further months, meaning that the crew that was soon to be going on leave will now have to most likely sustain their operations and their posts for several more months before the carrier is able to return back to its port at Norfolk, Virginia. Additionally, we have also been able to hear that inside of the area of Cuba, there has been some major developments over the course of the day as far as the United States and its continued blockade of Cuba from external oil resources. From what we understand, Cuba is undergoing a complete blackout inside of their country, and the largest oil refinery, which is currently found within Havana, Cuba, inside the country, apparently exploded and caught on fire today, causing significant damage to one of the few oil refineries that could refine crude oil if it ever arrived in Cuba, and also meaning that if the Cubans are ever able to get any form of oil, it's highly unlikely that they will be able to refine it and get their power grid back up online quickly, and also their transportation infrastructure, due to the fact that the only refinery that they had that they could refine any significant amount, at least for their needs, is generally out of action at the moment, and the Cuban government hardly has the money to be able to generally pay the bills, much less even repair a heavily damaged refinery. Additionally, we have also seen that the United States of America has made further announcements today in multiple avenues, as the U.S. has stated that strikes might be a lot more difficult against Iran this time than last time due to a myriad of reasons, but also due to the fact that currently the U.S. Air Force does not have possession or operational ability of GBU-57 MOPS, which are incredibly important for operations against Iran's nuclear facilities. And we've also been able to hear that the U.S. government has now announced that AI systems had actually been used in assisting for the preparations to capture Nicolas Maduro, the former president of Venezuela.
Hey Grok, how do we capture the president of Venezuela? That's insane.
Man, honestly, it is insane. We also were able to hear that the president is now putting pressure on Zelensky's government in Ukraine to create a peace deal with the Russian Federation because, and I quote, the Russians are dying to make a deal. And I don't really see them dying to make a deal, I just see them dying in Ukraine. But, you know, I guess the semantics there can sometimes get confused. Nevertheless, Europe is also continuing to distance itself from the United States of America, with France now announcing that they will be creating a European-centric nuclear defense deterrence, at least against the Russian Federation, that will be headed by the French and the British, extending a nuclear umbrella to Germany and Poland and other major NATO states and major states of the European Union in the event of a major attack by the Russian Federation in the future. The German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has also stated that the United States is largely starting to lose its position as the head of the free world due to its unstable actions within the recent year, and that they will be looking to try and find another stable trading partner that they will be able to work with, which heavily leans towards the Chinese. There has also been a shocking announcement that came out over just the past few hours, in which NATO announced that they had actually conducted a real war game, apparently inside of Poland or another NATO country, involving 2 Ukrainian battalions and 2 NATO battalions, and they pitted the NATO battalions against the Ukrainian battalions, and surprisingly, the Ukrainians came out on top and were able to get a resounding total victory against the 2 NATO battalions inside the war game. It was apparently announced that the reason for this was because of the heavy use of Ukrainian drone warfare by the Ukrainian side, and also other modern advanced battlefield tactics and doctrines that are emphasized heavily by the Ukrainian armed forces, which has now shocked a large amount of NATO countries now that it shows that the Ukrainian armed forces and their drone warfare doctrine is the very change that the future has been looking for in terms of modern warfare. Outside of that, the Ukrainian armed forces have also been able to land some significant hits within the Russian Federation overnight, within Voronezh, Oryol, the Moscow region, and also even in Rostov-on-Don. We also were able to hear of some further developments that apparently the Russians are forcing their citizens to still try and get on the Messenger Max, and the Russian economy is in such dire straits at the moment that even Volodymyr Solovyov, aka who we call the devil, one of Russia's key propagandists, is even starting to state that the Russian economy has largely collapsed at this moment, and that the Russian Federation is starting to more largely appear to be a failed state at this moment than one that's successfully fighting and winning a war. The Ukrainian armed forces have also made sure to further that idea today by holding down the line significantly significantly and still making moderate gains in the areas that we had reported on yesterday within Huilopol and Pokrovsk, although we don't have any significant developments, at least in those areas as of today, rather than the general statement that it appears that the momentum is still behind the Ukrainian army over the past 24 hours. We are going to be making sure to get into all of this news and all of the other little details of news that we have through the night, starting with our largest stories first, as tradition would always dictate on this channel, and then working our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. Suffice to say, today is another big day of news, and it does appear that we will be here for quite some time tonight, so make sure to strap in, folks, because there's a lot to cover. Moving us on into our first and most important pieces of news, the United States of America is still conducting significant airlift campaigns into the Middle East at this moment. As a matter of fact, as we're going live, we can see the continuous rotations of U.S. strategic airlift aircraft leaving the United States of America, and those that are currently seeing the rise of the dawn within the Middle East are now flying on their way back through Yukon and then eventually back to the United States to pick up another round of equipment and bring it back to the United States. To show you all a couple of these aircraft that are airborne and operating at this moment, we are able to see RRR 6223 of the Royal Air Force, which has also appeared to have conducted a flight from somewhere around San Bernardino and is returning back to the United Kingdom. But more importantly, we can actually see RCH 837, RCH 789, and RCH 701 all returning from the Middle East at this moment. RCH 798 has taken off from Spangdahelm in Germany and is currently flying on its way, apparently from what we can tell, either towards the Prince Sultan Air Base within Saudi Arabia or towards the area of the Al Udeid Air Base within Qatar. Additionally, a large amount of U.S. flights are still outbound to Europe as we're talking right now, with RCH 136, RCH 223, RCH 337, and a couple of other C-17s, including, let me see if I can find the other ones here really quickly. Looks like I cannot. Oh, here we go. Actually, sorry, correction, folks. This one's actually Blues 47. This call sign is not really connected with flights that are heading to CENTCOM at the moment, but we can see, once again, another large amount of C-17s that are airborne, even as we're covering the news right now, live on air. Over the course of the day, there has been a significant amount of flights, particularly within EUCOM's area of responsibility, which you can see all of them right here, with further C-5 Galaxy and C-17 flights making their way into separate bases throughout the Middle East and dropping off further equipment. It is believed that the equipment and personnel that is being dropped off at this moment is of a fairly wide variety, as C-5 Galaxies are generally believed to be carrying some of the larger and more intricate components of air defense systems, like the radar arrays of a THAAD battery system or a Patriot air defense system currently within the area, but it's also highly likely that these C-5s and C-17s may be bringing over additional spare parts and equipment for the U.S. Air Force's air squadrons, which are currently based out of Muafak, Prince Sultan, and Al Udeid air bases within the Middle East. There is also a decent likelihood that other equipment and other sorts of personnel of other units are being brought in as well, along with electronic warfare units, electronic warfare sustainment operations, possibly even munitions that could be carried on board of these aircraft, which are rapidly being transited into the Middle East. And there would be a good reason to believe that we might be seeing that a lot of these flights are not really pertaining to solely air defense movements and personnel movements, but are heavily including ammunition movements as well, because we are now starting to hear that, according to the United States Department of Defense and insider sources, the U.S. military is preparing for the possibility of a sustained weeks-long operation against Iran if the president orders an attack, according to two U.S. officials who are privy to the matter. In a sustained campaign, the U.S. military could hit Iranian state and security facilities, not just their nuclear infrastructure, according to one of the officials. It's highly likely
I was under the impression most of the time that they were actually going to go in and do that by default. I wasn't under the impression that they were only going to go for the nuclear sites again. At least that's what my impression was.
Apparently, at least up until this moment, if we're taking that wordage to mean anything, they were apparently only going to be targeting and striking a nuclear infrastructure again in this next round of operations. But I have a feeling that after the Department of Defense just found out last night that they don't have any MOPS, and they filled out that new contract, or more so new bidding order for more MOPS to be produced. I think that they're having to start changing their plans quite drastically, considering that attacks against nuclear facilities and infrastructure would not be even likely or possible at this point, due to the fact that MOPS will not be able to hit the facilities because we just don't have enough of them, and also due to the fact that the Iranians have now largely filled in the entrances to these nuclear facilities. Special forces resistance and special forces operators would highly likely not be able to get onto the ground and then make it into those facilities, meaning that striking the nuclear facilities directly may be off the menu. Instead, the U.S. military now seems to be leaning towards a multi-week-long air campaign against the Iranian government, armed forces, and other critical infrastructure to be able to try and bring the country to its knees to where it will accept U.S. demands whether or not the nuclear installations were directly hit or destroyed. To speak a little bit more in detail about what this sort of an air operation would look like, or what you could largely expect, at least as far as the targets that would be hit, it's highly likely that the U.S. government or the U.S. Department of Defense is starting to size up the Islamic Republic of Iran, what type of targets to be hit, and generally the two largest targets to be hit in this sort of an exchange in the broader, more so strategic sense, would be Iranian government facilities and Iranian military facilities. The Iranian government is an incredibly important apparatus to hit, as we do have to ensure that there is really no remnants left of any form of official government resistance to the United States once an operation like this concludes. More importantly, we also have to make sure that that government, once it ceases to exist, no longer has a military or any military capabilities to operate with after our air operations or military operations against Iran are complete. If we were talking about in a more intricate sort of a sense on what exactly would be hit, you can basically guarantee at this point that the high priority for the United States, if we were to open up preemptive strikes on Iran, at least very soon, would be to strike Iranian air defenses and the Iranian Air Force, and to also go ahead and meet the Iranian Navy at the head and try and strike and destroy them before they're able to leave Bandar Abbas and create a minefield within the Strait of Hormuz. It also appears that everything that we've been able to hear from U.S. officials who are privy to the matter behind the scenes and are leaking a little bit of info to the public, the U.S. is incredibly scared at the moment of the Iranians blockading the Strait of Hormuz and the kind of damage that would have to international oil markets. That also means that our analysis on the channel was dead on correct, and if the Iranians decide to preemptively mine the strait and conduct a complete blockade as a result of that, the United States of America would not be able to break that blockade for weeks or even months at that point. Even if we completely rendered the Iranian government non-existent at that point, the minefield would still exist within the Strait of Hormuz and would have to be demined. Something that the United States can do, but it's an incredibly long and arduous process, especially considering that the Iranians would most likely have most of our demining forces that would enter the strait under fire until we completely cleared them out of the near littoral shore areas, which would take some time. So for that reason, the U.S. is generally probably going to be shooting to destroy almost completely the Iranian Navy at the opening of a conflict, as well as Iranian air defenses and the Iranian Air Force, ensuring that most of Iran's defensive and offensive capabilities, at least at the very opening phase of that war, would no longer be existent. That means that we would be able to neutralize any Iranian resistance to further U.S. attacks on a multi-week-long campaign inside of their country, and we would also be able to ensure that they would not be able to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, which would skyrocket oil prices globally due to largely blockading most, if not all, Middle Eastern oil inside the Persian Gulf and not allowing it to exit out freely to be sold on the global market. A lot of people are wondering, largely as a result of this, why in the world is the United States delaying? And is it because they are trying to plan and prepare for this multi-week-long strike campaign against the Islamic Republic of Iran? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so that is the new question. Now that we've learned that U.S. forces are preparing a multi-week long campaign, not just a singular strike campaign, but multi-week of attacks on Iranian cities, military sites, and possibly nuclear sites, is this the reason why the U.S. is delaying to get ready for such a long campaign? 57% said yes, that is why the USA is stalling, while 26% said no, they're stalling for an entirely different reason, and 9% said I'm 50-50 on this one. So today we actually got a lot of clues from the U.S. administration about what they're currently planning to do with Iran. Number one, they want to continue negotiating for at least the next couple of weeks. So that's very clear. But if negotiations fall apart, which I would say the odds of that happening are probably extremely high, then they're going to do a multi-week campaign on Iran with the goal of regime change. We did hear that stated today by the executive that regime change would be the most preferred option against the Ayatollah's regime. So that paints a very very much different picture than we had heard in the last few days or so. And I think that might be why the U.S. is stalling. They might be trying to get so many assets into the region, including that second aircraft carrier strike group, because they need that to be able to sustain a multi-week long attack period. So I'm with the 58%. I think that's why the U.S. is stalling. It's becoming a lot more clear now that the U.S. is using this to get ready for such a large attack. But Enforcer, what say you?
We also have to additionally consider that the reason why the U.S. might be stalling is due to the fact that as far as foreign policy willpower and diplomatic good favor by other Middle Eastern or Arabian nations, it appears to be fairly taut at the moment, at least within the countries that are allowing U.S. forces to be based inside of them. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, along with Bahrain, are generally allowing for U.S. forces to build up inside of their territorial borders to really any extent that we would like at the moment. However, the Saudi Arabians specifically have gone out of their way to say that they are not really a big fan of striking the Iranians, although the Iranians certainly do need to be bombed soon. That's literally their words. They don't want to see Iran get bombed, but they also know that Iran needs to be bombed. Literally the words of the Saudi diplomats that spoke to the United States make that one make sense. But outside of that, though, because of that reason, we really can't operate offensively out of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, or Jordan until a later date and time, meaning that we need to have airfields, maybe even some that we just float into the area, to be able to operate significant amounts of the U.S. air arm off of until those countries start to give us permission to use their nations as jumping boards for offensive operations against Iran. And that is why it's incredibly important that we have an aircraft carrier or two aircraft carriers within the region. An aircraft carrier operates within international waters, meaning that we don't have to get any sort of sovereign or national approval from anybody to be able to conduct offensive operations from air bases based inside of their country against the Iranians. This also means that having a second carrier within the area would easily increase our combat air arm from about 80 aircraft right now, which is currently on board the USS George, I believe it's the USS Abraham Lincoln, if I'm not mistaken, and then we would see that the USS Gerald R Ford, which is currently transiting into the area right now, would be able to bring about an additional 80 aircraft in its combat air arm, increasing our air power to around 160 aircraft available at any given moment for a wide variety of operations. Of course, all of those are not multi-role aircraft like the F-35C or the F-18 Super Hornets, but still, the point stands that we would have a significant air arm at that point, and one that would be large enough and comparable enough that it would actually be facing the Iranians on a 1-to-1 ratio in terms of raw numbers, and qualitatively, we would easily be able to sweep the Iranian Air Force out of the sky at that point with a 1-to-1 air power ratio. Not only that, we would also be able to conduct a significant amount of electronic warfare operations, as both carrier groups do carry a significant amount of EA-18G Growlers, and we would also be able to conduct suppression of enemy air defense operations, as some of the FA-18 Hornets can carry AGM-88 harms. So generally, the carriers, as far as strike packages are concerned, is a complete package, and bringing a second one into the area would be incredibly important in this situation, considering that U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan might be tied up, at least in terms of being able to join in on the initial strikes, due to the diplomatic red tape that we have to get through to get to that point. So I would say that that is decently likely. And also, speaking of those developments with the Gerald R. Ford, it was officially announced today, and we generally were also covering this last night, that the Pentagon will be deploying the Gerald R. Ford into the Middle East. From what we understand, the Gerald R. Ford will not be in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea like the Abraham Lincoln Strike Group. It actually will technically be within EUCOM's area of responsibility within the Eastern Mediterranean. But while it is technically within the geographical parameters of EUCOM's area of responsibility, it will actually be subordinated to CENTCOM's area of responsibility within the Middle East, and will be able to join in on military operations there. Additionally, the Gerald R. Ford will be bringing with it 3 additional Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, each one of these having about 80 or so SM-3 block missiles that can be used for air defense purposes at about an 1,100-mile range. That additionally means that Israel will be getting a significant amount of air support, which they will desperately need, because during the 12-day war, it was generally proven that Israeli air defenses are woefully inadequate for the kind of attacks that the Iranians can pose. But we've also heard that the U.S. is becoming increasingly concerned about the threat of the number of missiles that the Iranians have, and possibly even an increasing number of transport-erector launchers that the Iranians may have been able to get into possession of between the last war and this one just 8 months ago, to where the Iranians might be able to fire off a much larger volley of these over a longer sustained period of time. If that is the case, the air defenses that are present within the area on the ground and at sea could get overwhelmed. And that also means that having a larger amount of air defenses in the form of the Arleigh Burkes and an additional carrier strike group would also be massively beneficial in terms of defensive operations to protect U.S. forces and also protect the forces of our allies within the region. Also, we have heard that while all of this is going on right now, the U.S. is still apparently going to be either trying to stall for time or legitimately looking for a deal. We can't really tell which it is because, according to the statements from the president, it looks like they're legitimately still looking for a deal, which I would say is an outright mistake. It should just be used as a stalling tactic. But we were able to hear that apparently the U.S. will be conducting another round of negotiations on the 17th of February. This will once again include the highly esteemed Steve Witkoff and also Jared Kushner as well. We have also been able to hear that apparently the president then stated today that regime change in Iran could be the best thing that could happen, which generally seems to be a statement that isn't leaning into negotiations, that is some kind of leaning back into the idea that this is all just wasting time for us to be able to get the right kind of forces in the area to be able to conduct the proper kind of strikes that we need on the Iranians. And a lot of people are wondering, with that statement in mind, and also the fact that more diplomatic talks are scheduled for about 5 or 4 days from now, a lot of people are wondering whether the United States is really looking for a regime change inside of Iran, or if we're looking for some sort of an other achievement that we might be able to gain within Iran. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so currently it sounds like the tentative plan by U.S. forces is they're going to conduct, like we said, a multi-week campaign on Iran with the goal of regime change. So as far as we're aware, there are currently no plans that we've gotten word about that they plan on going in on the ground inside of Iran to rid themselves of the regime. It sounds like they'll largely be going with airstrikes, probably in combination with Israeli air forces and U.S. air forces in these upcoming attacks. So do you think that's enough, these airstrikes, to actually cause regime change? And it looks like people are pretty much split on this poll. 45% said yes, regime change under those circumstances is likely, while 33% said no, regime change is still unlikely with just airstrikes, and 16% said it's a 50-50 chance of it actually working. And this one is a little contentious, I will admit. There's not a real clear answer to this question because, typically speaking, airstrikes are good for a very crude method, but in order to properly gain control of the government sites inside of Iran, you have to have men on the ground for that. The U.S. Air Force could be relying on the Iranian people to seize power after they start striking the IRGC. That could be their tentative plan, but that's a big leap of faith to take because it could be that the protesters are so beat down because they got mowed down the street by the regime that they're not very apt to come back out. We're still not really sure exactly what the appetite is for the protesters to actually return to the streets. So that's a very big if right there to hang your hat on. So I would say it's a 50-50 chance of it. Typically speaking, regime change would require boots on the ground, but maybe airstrikes might do it. I guess the Ayatollah could run to Russia. I guess that could be one scenario. He could just simply flee, and that could be the end of it, perhaps, unless someone else happens to take power that could be an underling of the Ayatollah. So I'm with the 16%. I would say 50-50. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that, in my opinion, I would have to be with the 33%. Regime change is highly unlikely, and according to the prior precedents that we've gotten from this administration on how they operate in foreign policy, regime change is probably not what they're looking for, because this sort of similar sentiment was generally echoed about Maduro's government and those that were significant followers of the socialist revolution of Hugo Chavez within Venezuela. Yet now we see that only Maduro was removed, but the entirety of the extremist socialist government that generally believes in the teachings and ideology of Hugo Chavez within Venezuela still stands as the operating government within the country, although the president's claims was that the government was going to be completely removed and a pro-American one was going to be put in place. Based off of that, these are very similar statements that are being made right now, meaning that if anything, Khomeini, who is the very tippy top of the Iranian government, if we want to put it that way, might get wiped out in an airstrike or might be taken by special forces in a raid, although that option is highly unlikely, but the rest of the Iranian government would highly likely stand under the threat that the same thing that would happen to Khomeini might happen to all of them if they continue to try and resist the U.S.'s will within the region. With that in mind, I would have to say that direct regime change is highly unlikely. If anything, we're probably going to keep the very same regime in power that is there right now in power after strikes conclude, possibly just without Khamenei. On top of that, one cannot conduct a regime change inside of Iran without involving significant amounts of military action and also conducting operations heavily on the ground with ground forces. A regime change just cannot be done remotely. Attempting to try and conduct a regime change via Zoom to where U.S. forces are elsewhere in the Middle East but not directly in the country will leave a significant power vacuum, and with a significant power vacuum being formed, multiple factions will be created inside the country, including those that will be able to heavily arm themselves due to the fact that Iranian military facilities will probably no longer be occupied, or the Iranian military, which will be desperate to make any money, considering that there's no government paying them anymore, will easily be bribed by questionable groups to be able to walk into Iranian bases, pick up a load of weapons and equipment, and then just walk right back out and start conducting reigns of terror throughout the country. Largely, a lawless land would start to form at that point if the U.S. tried to create a regime change remotely. And generally, while there might be a decent amount of support for a government separate than that of Khamenei's, we also have to keep in mind that a large amount of those people were just killed recently, with around 40,000 of the people who were brave enough to go out into the streets being mowed down in the streets about a month ago to this very day. So I would have to say that regime change is pretty unlikely in my opinion, just based off of the precedent that the current administration has laid out in Venezuela, and also due to the fact that it seems to be highly unpopular in the administration's decision-making framework right now to ever put boots on the ground anywhere for any longer period of time. The best thing that we could probably look for is that Khamenei would get bombed in an airstrike, and then we would just basically threaten the rest of the Iranian government to do as we say, or the rest of them would get bombed as well at some point in the future.
Yeah. Also, by the way, we did hear today another statement that was very telling from the president. A reporter had asked him, they said, are you considering sending commandos in on the ground to go and retrieve the enriched uranium from these nuclear sites, if it still exists? And I can't remember the exact quote. We'd have to pull it up on Twitter, but he said something to the effect of, that would be the least important part of the plan, or that would be like the least relevant part of it or something. He played that down quite a bit. So I think there's an aversion to putting U.S. troops on the ground in Iran, because also it has a bad connotation to it, because the current president is trying to basically keep the U.S. out of war in the Middle East. We don't want to repeat like an Iraq situation or something like that, or in Afghanistan. We don't want to repeat any of that. And there's a very, very strong aversion to it for that reason politically. So I have a feeling it's going to probably be just airstrikes. And also, I'm not sure if it's wise to send commandos inside of Iran. Like we've covered this before. It's an entirely different world than Venezuela. Venezuela's air defense was a lot less powerful than Iran's. Even though Iran is still using Gush guns and very primitive air defense systems, it's a lot more potent and is also a lot more frequent across their country than it is in Venezuela. So I just think they're going to probably go for airstrikes and hope for the best with the Iranian people rising back up and trying to overthrow whatever's left of the Khamenei regime probably at that point.
Yeah, that might be the case. And additionally, we have been able to see that while the U.S. is generally trying to weigh out its strike options and possibly buy itself time with further diplomatic talks, or legitimately pursue a path of talks with the Iranians, which will probably not achieve much of anything, we did get to see that U.S. force deployments that we know of within the area are already sizable at the moment. Just to give you a little bit of a breakdown, the USS Abraham Strike Group is currently within the area, along with the USS Mitchell and McFall, which are detached destroyers operating individually outside of the carrier strike group. We also understand that 2 nuclear fast attack submarines, including the USS Georgia and South Dakota, are present within the area. And right now, near to the eastern Mediterranean, we have the 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, the Roosevelt, the Buckley, and also apparently the Buckley, another Buckley, I'm assuming, or maybe a typo there, also within the eastern Mediterranean. And we also have a couple of other vessels that are transiting into the area, including the USS Gerald R Ford Strike Group, the USS Mahon, the Bainbridge, the Winston Churchill, and also a nuclear-powered CSG-12 Escort, at least for the carrier group. So they'll be bringing another nuclear-powered aircraft carrier into the area. I also want to make it a little bit clear that the Chinese and Russian naval presence within the area is heavily overstated, because they're basically non-existent. I'll just be completely frank with you all. This part doesn't really matter too much on the equation of things here. But the Iranians do have their little motorboats near to the area of the Strait of Hormuz, and they also have the drone carrier hanging out, anchored right outside of Bandar Abbas at the moment, although that doesn't really pose a threat to U.S. forces. Moving on from that, we have also heard that the Iranians are trying their best to at least put their best front or best guns forward, as we were able to see more evidence of air defense drills being conducted within Isfahan overnight.
Oh, damn.
Quite
Getting a
large-
little bit spicy in Isfahan. It's an ugly sight out there. They said hot pepper time. It's chilies.
Man, I mean, honestly, straight up, they are definitely getting ready for something at least. And we have seen, folks, that the Iranians have been conducting near daily exercises of their air defenses over the recent week or two since the U.S. has started to get a little bit more towards the line of war. The reason is because the Iranian air defenses basically get absolutely no training at all throughout most of the year, meaning that the Iranians like to conduct what they call crash course training right up at the moment when a strike or a war is about to begin, because that's a lot cheaper. If you were to train all these guys up to a proficient level and give them a certain amount of hours and a certain amount of munitions to operate with every year for training, that would be incredibly expensive. So what the Iranians like to do is that they like to give basically everybody no training time on their systems and also no munitions to train with, but whenever a situation starts to get close to happening and they think that war is becoming a higher likelihood or a certainty, then they finally start to put out a little bit of spare cash and money and munitions for these units to train with, so they can kind of get a little bit familiar with the air defense systems before the war actually kicks off. That's also why, a lot like with Venezuela and Russia, you never really see their air defenses working that competently, because they have basically only been introduced to their air defense systems again within the weeks leading up to that war, and they're basically not always familiarized or fine-tuned with how their operational systems work of any type, whether it be a Gush gun or an S-400 or an HQ-19 or an HQ-11. They really don't know how any of them work until the final weeks leading up to a war, and then they're basically working with a novice sort of a concept of how the system actually works in real practice. The Iranians have also made it fairly clear, at least within Tehran, that they're trying to at least put a little bit of less strain on relations, because apparently we've heard that Iran has released on bail senior reformists that were arrested after the protests. So instead of shooting these people like they've shot everyone else inside of the country, it seems as though they're starting to release them a little bit at the moment to try and make it seem like they're actually turning a new leaf on top of the graves of about 40,000 people that they shot in the streets about a month ago. Outside of that, we have also been able to hear that apparently the French are sending in a little bit of their own naval forces as well, as we have been able to hear that the FS Forbin, which is, I believe, a Horizon-class anti-air frigate, is currently transiting through the area of the Suez Canal. You can actually see it right there in that picture. We believe that it may be heading into...
That's kind of interesting, isn't it? That's another Chinese satellite photo. It seems like what China is trying to do, and instead of just directly giving intelligence to these countries like Iran and all of our adversaries, they just release the photos to the general public. So that way there's still a level of plausible deniability to it. So we get to see it, but at the same time, Iran gets to see it too by default, and pretty much anybody else as an adversary gets to see this stuff. It seems like that's the strategy at this point. And that's interesting that we keep seeing these photos popping up all over the place.
Yeah, it is really interesting. That I definitely have to say. And also, we have been able to hear outside of this news of the FS Horizon making its way into the area, that at the same time, the U.S. is talking a little bit more about the situation with Iran right now. And we did get to hear that from some sources today, U.S. officials stated that the planning for strikes on Iran this time around is much more complex, and they fully expect Iran to retaliate massively. The reason why the planning is a little bit more complex this time around, at least according to some U.S. officials, is because we did not completely destroy the Iranian ballistic missile program the last time we bombed them during Operation Midnight Hammer, and the Israelis really didn't either. So, over the past 8 months, the Iranians have been mass-producing missiles out the wazoo. We believe that they're producing about several hundred of them a month, around 300 approximately. And we also apparently are now believing that they have been able to produce, or at least field, some larger amounts of transport-erector launchers, which are basically the guns of the system, and then the missiles are the ammunition that's fired out of the rifle, if you want to look at it in that more of a simple term. You have to have a larger number of transport-erector launchers, not missiles, to be able to fire off a higher rate of missiles. A large stockpile of missiles just means that you'll be able to keep those transport erector launchers busy, the few that they have, for a longer period of time trying to fire off all of those missiles. But apparently, the Iranians now have a larger amount of transport erector launchers, meaning that they'll be able to fire off more missiles each time they fire, and they also have a far larger number of missiles, meaning they're able to keep up that rate of fire for a longer amount of time. This is generally showing that back 8 months ago, it probably wouldn't have been a really big and grand idea for the U.S. to have conducted the multi-weeks long air operation back then, because it became incredibly clear then that the Iranians were not able to sustain a high rate of fire with their missile forces or drone forces over an extended period of time, even just over a week. We saw that the amount of missiles and drones that were fired towards the coalition allies within the region were significantly decreasing day over day. Now we're seeing that the Iranians have largely tried to fix that as much as they can, at least here recently, even according to U.S. officials, and that's what's making this very difficult to prepare, because if the U.S. conducts strikes in Iran, and we do not get those completely disabling strikes that we're looking for at the opening volley, the Iranians might be able to fire off a large enough number of missiles and drones at the United States and their allies in the region that they could deliver some pretty serious damage to U.S. forces in their operational capacity, and also other allied operational capacities within the area, which once again makes it a little bit clear. I mean, not to always say that our analysis is correct, but it almost always is. It kind of makes it a little bit clear we could have conducted the multi-week long air operation back then instead of a one-night strike, and the U.S. would be in a far better position now in the Middle East today than it was 8 months ago. So with that in mind, a lot of people are talking about the little development that we've been hearing elsewhere out of the Middle East, now that we've generally rounded out the news in the Middle East, and we're going to be bringing y'all over and into the Caribbean, because everybody loves the Caribbean. Back in the day, it used to be the hunt for Captain Crack Sparrow, but now that Crack Sparrow is currently up in prison somewhere in New York, I think it's the Metropolitan Detention Facility, we are going to have to move on to another Captain Crack Sparrow. This one isn't really a Captain Crack Sparrow, it's more so Captain Broke-Ass Sparrow, and that's the Cubans. We have been able to hear that the Cubans are running into a little bit of an issue, and blackouts are now starting to grip the larger part of the country. Well, I got to tell y'all, it's not looking good. It's not looking that good right now.
It's like they don't really have much electricity in Cuba. It looks like the place is a ghost town, basically. It's like Havana is the only place with electricity. This is like basically like the Mediterranean version of North Korea.
What's interesting, though, is that there's this little bit of light coming down here from this bay down in Guantanamo. Oh, I forgot. That's actually the U.S.'s Guantanamo Bay. Oh, well. I mean, oh, well.
Oh, man. I tell you what. The only difference between North Korea and Cuba?
What's the difference?
There is no difference. They're both commie bastards.
Oh, man, rip Fidel. Man, if Fidel could see what Cuba turned into these days, he'd be real proud. It went from being a pretty it went from having a significant wealth disparity, where most people lived in a shithole, but some people lived pretty nice, to nowadays, Fidel was able to bring his dream into fruition. Everybody in Cuba lives like it's a shithole. Nobody can escape it, no matter what. I mean, that's really what Fidel was looking for this whole time. But outside of that, the Cubans are running into a little bit of an issue, and to explain this map here and what it's showing, this map is showing where there is still an operational electric grid, where there's dimmer lights, and then where there's no detected light. Throughout most of the country, there's basically no electricity grid, but in some of the larger cities, like Holguin, Santa Clara, and Camagüey, the power is greatly reduced at the moment due to the power grid also starting to fail and completely collapse at the moment. The public infrastructure and transportation grid did collapse several days ago, from what we understand, and there's not even an ability to fly aircraft out of Cuba that have landed there at the moment, meaning that Cuba has no connection to the outside world rapidly in terms of air operations. Havana is really the last city left right now. It's basically the only holdout that has any kind of actual power. And if I can pull this up for y'all, I want to pull up the Cuban energy grid, about the 4 megawatts of it that exists, and let's see what we can find on the Cuban power grid. So let's see here.
Also, by the way, did I say Caribbean or Mediterranean earlier when I made that joke?
I think you said Cuba.
Oh, okay. I think I got mixed up here. I see some people saying I said Mediterranean. If I said that, I meant to say the Caribbean. I must have said the wrong thing earlier.
Let's see here. I can't actually find a lot of info on the Cuban energy grid, and I think that's because it's a communist country. So, sadly, we won't be able to get y'all a great deal of detail on that side of things. But one thing that we can tell y'all is that while the Cuban energy grid probably runs mostly on oil, because that would be a pretty cheap thing to run it on, although it's pretty dirty, it appears that they'll be having a problem keeping the energy grid up for much longer. In Havana, which is the largest city in Cuba, you can get yourself a delicious cubano, which is a sandwich, generally from Cuba. But more importantly, there's this large oil refinery right here. And a lot of people are thinking, hey, that's no large oil refinery. That looks like an oil storage facility, and you'd be correct. I'm actually trying to find this oil refinery right now while we're on air because it's near to the harbor area. But I went to the wrong spot of the harbor, and it's around here somewhere. It's around here somewhere. Where the hell is it even? Um, well, I see you know your oil
He's
refineries
having a
well.
hard time.
Damn, I
I'll
mean,
throw you a lifeline. I'll throw you a lifeline. It's the Nico Lopez Oil Refinery. So if you type that in, it'll bring you right to it.
let's see. I'll be damned, it was. Oh my god, I don't know why, folks. I always make sure to check the locations earlier. For some reason, I checked this one in like a split second, and I completely forgot what it looked like. And when I went here, I was like, there isn't really any Oh, I'm sorry, everyone. The reason why I said this wasn't a refinery is because this is the only condenser right here. And I'm used to looking at Russian refineries, you know, the ones that actually are pretty big, and they usually refine hundreds of thousands of barrels of usable fuel products per day. I'm so sorry, everyone. I forgot that Cuba is such a broke-ass backwards country. They only have the one condenser complex. The rest of their refinery just stores either usable fuel or crude oil that's about to be refined by the single condenser. So
Yeah.
I'm so sorry
You know the sad part. You know the sad part is this is one of their largest facilities that refines oil. So this is one of their flagships right here, and their flagship. I mean, it looks almost abandoned the way it looks. It's got a bad rating too. It's got like a 1 star. I don't know what the hell that review even said on it.
Man, it's got the refinery and its facilities are among the main causes of high pollution not only in the bay's waters, but also in the air and general environment. This harmful waste load affects the surrounding municipalities with the presence of soot, which is carried by the breeze towards the city. Solid waste and fuel that have made it one of the most polluted areas in the country. And then someone else just put a 1 star.
That must be one of the country's aristocrats or something. That guy's got very high standards. Does he not realize this is Cuba?
Man, this guy said, "A Miguel a la verga." That's like, damn, okay, he's going off. But beyond that, though, we did get to hear that this little refinery today. Oh, there we go. It's right on the refinery now. It apparently had a little fire breakout.
Oh, what? We can't show that. We can't show that. We can't show this.
Oh, heavens. I'm sorry. I mean, heavens, I thought we could show this. Apparently we can't, but the fire was brewing up nicely, and we could actually give you all an idea of where it is. There's the only condenser that they have back there on the right side of the screen. So this is closer to the waterfront, near to a concrete breakwater. So we believe that it's somewhere around here. Probably towards this loading derrick that you can see right here. So that seems to be where the fire was generally coming from today. It didn't effectively direct the condenser, however, but it does appear that it has affected the refinery's ability to take on crude oil to then refine into some form of a usable fuel product, basically blocking it from any sort of an external oil supply that would come from a place like, say, Russia or Russia. So that's generally what we understand at the moment. Very interesting sort of a development with that, and it almost makes it seem like that's a little intentional, considering that the Russians have announced that they're actually going to try and break the blockade that the U.S. has imposed on Cuba, and that they're going to try and provide them with oil. It's a little bit interesting that the loading derrick that they would have used if they tried to give Cuba oil just caught on fire today, and is generally going to be out of operation as a result of that, possibly even with no ability to repair it, at least on the Cuban side, for an indefinite period of time due to the ongoing blockade.
We have to have people in there doing stuff like a hybrid warfare against Cuba. That's got to be happening because this is almost identical to what happened in Venezuela before Venezuela got attacked by the U.S. Special Forces and Maduro got extracted. Very similar to it. So it looks logical that the U.S. would naturally want to knock out whatever refining capabilities that Cuba does have, because that's literally the only way they can try to save the situation, because they're being basically blockaded by the U.S. forces. They can't get any more fuel, and the only hope for them is the refineries, or they can get help from China or Russia. And Russia's going to try to run the blockade, but we haven't seen them do that yet. We'll have to wait and see if time shows what they're going to do with that. And I'm not sure what China's doing. They said a while back they were going to help, but they still haven't shown up either. So they're really kind of at a dead end, actually.
They really are at a dead end at the moment, and I'd have to say, folks, the Cubans are in a pretty rough spot at the moment. But one that I'd have to say is rather unfortunate for the Cubans and the Cuban government, I'd have to be completely frank with. But outside of that, though, a lot of people are talking about whether or not the U.S. is clearly behind what happened, this unfortunate incident that happened at this Cuban refinery today, the largest one in the country, mind you. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so we did see that major fire at Cuba's largest oil refinery, or at least one of them, and is the U.S. clearly behind it? And it looks like people are all over the place on this one. 33% said it's possible, but we need more info first, while 30% said yes, the USA likely caused the explosion, and 28% said no, the U.S. isn't behind it. And I would say I'm with the 30%. I think the U.S. is definitely behind it. It's logical that they would be behind it because they've already said that Cuba is going to collapse, which means, in translation, the U.S. is going to cause Cuba to collapse. And that's not too hard to do because Cuba was basically derelict a long time ago. The place is basically a shell of its former self, if you can even call it that, and it's barely functioning. It's a failed state by every measure, and it's basically a proxy for China and Russia. So the USA seems to be accelerating this quite a bit. They're, of course, blockading the island from all fuel, and they can't even run jets from the island because they're all out of aviation fuel as well. So it's a tough spot for Cuba. I'm not sure how this is going to end up. I'm not sure if the U.S. is simply going to stand by and let them continue to suffer, or is the U.S. going to take like direct military action against the Cuban regime to basically finish them off? I'm not really sure. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say before I even answer that, I went onto a random street view in Havana, and this looks like Haiti.
It looks like Hades.
I mean, it looks like Haiti or Hades. It could be either. Like, it really, I mean, it's like kind of like take your pick. I mean, this building is collapsing so badly right here. They had to cordon off the whole area around it, and they have wooden trestles basically shoring up the building to try and stop it from completely collapsing. I mean, there's literally trees growing out of this thing. I mean, like, damn. I mean, that's pretty bad.
It's really tough, man. Let's say it's honestly Cuba. I mean, it's like a. I mean, it's just a pitiful thing. It's like a dying state. Like it's really dead already. The people are suffering. So I mean, is the U.S. going to make them suffer extra? It's like I get the fact we're trying to make the government collapse, but ultimately, though, the people that are going to pay the price are going to be the Cuban civilians because the people that are in charge of Cuba, just like it works in every communist dictatorship, like we're seeing in Cuba, the leadership gets to ride it out largely unscathed, at least for the most part. But the people that are already living in absolute squalor are going to continue to get even worse. Also, by the way, what kind of truck? Did you see that green little truck? Is that a Unimog?
it looks like one.
Yeah, it looks like a really old Unimog. That's crazy.
Also, these women right here are also down there, like same dress and all. Like they're time travelers apparently, or there's duplicates of Cuban people down there. Like there's just like the same Cuban people like over and over. But beyond that though, I'd have to say that I gotta say, folks, that the operations that we're conducting against Cuba right now, I really don't understand where they're coming from. Because if you look at a country like this, one, they don't pose an economic or strategic threat because they can. I mean, like, if your country looks like Haiti from stem to stern, you're not posing really a threat to the United States at that point. They can't really ever pose a threat to the United States because they're so bad off. It would take another country giving them hundreds of billions of dollars to even just get them off of the ground, really, and try and get them into something of a semi-okay state. I mean, like, this is the capital of their country. If you went to a country like North Korea and you even looked at Pyongyang, and North Korea is just a little bit better off than Cuba. I mean, Pyongyang is a million miles ahead of this, and they literally live in basically squalor as well for the larger part. It's really like I really don't get what the ambition here is with Cuba, because I would like to see the communist government fade away and that Cuba is generally opened up to the Western world. But how we're doing this is generally bringing a lot of suffering and hardship onto a nation of people who have only known suffering and hardship for about the past 60 years, really even 70 years to be entirely honest. And it's been such bad hardship that many of them, by the tens of thousands during the 80s and the 90s, would make makeshift rafts and face the incredibly arduous weather sometimes that existed in the Caribbean to just try and make it to the United States to possibly have a chance at getting out of such a hell that Cuba is. I don't really know
Yeah,
what their
and
ambition is here.
And also, if the U.S. wanted to take Cuba or like take direct military action against it, it's not like Cuba has like a really powerful military force or something, and their air defense, as far as we know, is minimal. So it's not necessary to destroy what's remaining of the Cuban economy to properly go and take it over. So if a takeover is not the goal, then what is the goal at that point? Because I mean, ultimately, I mean, surely we're not going to sit by and just let the citizens, just starve and die and also just suffer like this. It's like we're going to either do something direct or let it go, one or the other. But I'm not sure. We're like in between at this point. We're like in the middle of taking action and kind of not taking action, which is kind of strange.
Yeah, I would have to say this is really kind of bizarre, and also on top of that, like Matthew's saying, Cuba doesn't really have a military, and also there's such a there's such a bad off country. Their entire nation exists, including the very top of their government, on a house of cards. You could easily go in with a limited special forces operation and basically dismantle the government from the top down and rebuild one from the ground up. And the country's so bad off, it's so beat down, and it's so destitute. It's not like the country would factionalize into multiple groups. I mean, a lot of people would just be looking for their lives to marginally improve. It wouldn't even take a lot. And if you really wanted to do something like this in the present day right now, it would be a pretty easy affair to just go down there and just overthrow the government overnight and allow for an interim government to be formed that would generally bring Cuba out of the clutches of communism. Instead of going about it this way, to where we blockade the whole island, cut them out of power and transportation for a country that has struggled and has just been beat down for decades by basically everyone in the world, and then make them suffer even farther in the meantime to hope to passively destroy the Cuban government. I would say, like, I don't really get what this is really about and what the end goal is here, because I'm all for in advancing U.S. interests, but I also believe in the U.S. ideal of being humane about it, and I don't really like the idea of inflicting mass suffering on a country that already suffers enough to try and achieve our foreign policy objectives. We could go about this a whole other way to cut down on the suffering of the Cuban citizenry, but to also see that the Cuban government, which is generally anti-American, is dismantled with a new government being brought in.
Yeah, I would say so. It seems like that'd be the more humane way to go about it. It's just, it's just picking fights. Like, do we need to pick a fight with Cuba right now? Probably not. I would still say probably not. I still have the same belief about Cuba that I had about Venezuela. But the problem is, though, it's a return back to the Monroe Doctrine. That's what this basically is. They're coining it the Donroe Doctrine now. And it's more about moving our military and our ambitions into our hemisphere instead of the hemisphere, for example, in Europe and Asia. Which I'm not sure if that's a wise idea, because the Monroe Doctrine was during an entirely different time. Today, we live in a highly globalized and interconnected world, which means the entire globe is our hemisphere, basically. And that goes for pretty much every major power on the planet. So why we should try to revert back to a time that no longer exists and try to move back to our hemisphere, which is South America and Mexico, places like that, it really doesn't make much sense. And also, picking a fight with Cuba, which already quite suffering quite badly, is a little interesting, considering that we have much larger fights on our hands, like, for example, Russia, Ukraine, Iran, Israel. We have all these situations happening. And also, we have Taiwan that's still lurking around. That one's just lurking silently, at least for right now. So, I mean, it's a lot of stuff going on to be picking fights with South America.
Yeah, I just don't get it. And also, I saw someone say, well, how about making Cuba an overseas territory? I'm generally against that because, in my honest opinion, some of our overseas territories are incredibly important for strategic means, but we very rarely ever maintain or treat properly the citizenry of the overseas territories well. And that's something that actually, interesting enough, I'd have to say, came out kind of during the Super Bowl, is that a lot of people find it interesting that Puerto Ricans don't really have a lot of allegiance to the United States, and they seem to have more so allegiance to the concept of an independent Puerto Rico than anything. And I mean, if you look down there at their territory, I can tell you outright why. I mean, the U.S. federal government basically ignores the overseas territories and gives them absolutely no funding. And also, on top of that, due to this ancient law that we have here in the United States called the Jones Act, they basically get tariffed by the U.S. government for existing, and I'll actually explain why. according to the Jones Act, U.S. overseas territories can only trade with the mainland of the United States of America and nobody else. Because of that, these companies have a monopoly on conducting trade with overseas territories, and they jack up their rates. That means that Cubans basically get tariffed. Oh, actually, sorry, Puerto Ricans get tariffed about $80 billion a year, pretty much, because shipping a container to Puerto Rico costs $3,000 per container versus the usual international standard, which would be about $1,500, which is about half the amount. On top of that, the U.S. federal government has done nothing to shore up the electrical infrastructure of Puerto Rico. That is seeing that Puerto Rico goes through rolling blackouts a lot like Cuba does. I mean, it basically is just Cuba, but U.S. controlled, and we really do nothing to improve it. And that's the same with a lot of our overseas territories like Guam and elsewhere, where there isn't really a lot of infrastructure and we really don't maintain it too well. So at that point, the Cubans would be replacing their communist overlords and their poor quality of life for U.S. overlords, basically, with still no elected representation and really no guaranteed quality of life, which I'm not really a big fan of. I would be a big fan of it. The U.S. would make sure to go of its way to treat our territories well, because they are U.S. citizens like the rest of us, and I believe that American citizens should always be able to look towards the U.S. government to provide them with services and also the same sorts of liberties and ideals that Americans here in the mainland live by. But I don't really like the idea of taking a territory and then basically abandoning them in our thoughts and then sowing resentment against the United States because we demand nothing but loyalty from them, but we give them nothing in return for their expected loyalty. So I would say that if anything, we should see that Cuba becomes, if we conduct a military operation, or more so remain an independent country with a government that is American aligned. That's generally what I would think would be the best sort of a move in this situation.
Yeah, possibly so. We'll have to see. It's just very confusing right now, but I'm sure over time we'll find out like we did with Venezuela. But right now we're kind of flying blind a little bit. I think most people are actually.
Yeah, I would have to say. But moving on from that and out of Cuba, we've also gotten a little bit of additional news out of the Caribbean as well. We were able to hear earlier in the day that there was a strike on another boat. According to U.S. Southcom, they stated that on February 13th, at the direction of Commander General Francis L. Donovan, Joint Task Force Southern Spear conducted a lethal kinetic strike on a vessel operated by designated terrorist organizations. Intelligence confirmed the vessel was transiting along known narco-trafficking routes in the Caribbean and was engaged in narco-trafficking operations. 3 narco-terrorists were killed during this action. No U.S. military forces were harmed. We also have a video of that action being conducted right here. When you see the boat traveling along at a fairly high speed and then getting hit directly, it appears there was a secondary explosion.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say too. Also, was this off the Venezuelan coast, did you say?
It was somewhere in the Caribbean, but they didn't really say exactly where.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it appeared to have a secondary explosion. I don't think a fisherman has any lures that are explosive like that, so that's a little bit fascinating.
Yeah, that's a little I don't know what they were carrying, really. I mean, it had to have been something combustible, maybe some sort of fuel, to extend the range of the boat so that way they could conduct a longer range leg through the area. But it apparently suffered some sort of a secondary explosion. We understand that 3 people on board the vessel were killed in the midst of the strike. Outside of that, we also were able to hear that the U.S. has now given authorization to 5 major oil companies to resume operations in Venezuela. So it appears the U.S. is still trying to press forward with putting U.S. oil companies back in Venezuela with the incredibly unpredictable and shaky environment that currently exists in foreign policy between the still radical socialist government of Venezuela and the United States of America's oil companies, basically putting the oil companies right in the middle of what might become another explosive diplomatic fallout here within the near future. But moving us on out of that news and on up into the capital of the United States of America, Washington, D.C., we also have a couple of other pieces of news to knock out here really quickly. Speaking of Venezuela, we did get to hear that the Pentagon has apparently announced that they used Anthropic's AI tool, Claude, in the military operation to capture Nicolas Maduro. Claude, what is a GBU-57? I don't know how they use that thing, really.
Yeah, well, we're not really told, and also that's the report at least. I haven't heard anything about that particular AI being used in the military. That's the first I've ever heard of that. So if it's true, that's fascinating. Also, it's really fascinating to me that the apparently decision makers in the military are starting to rely heavily upon several different AI platforms to make decisions like this. I wonder if that's the best way to go. I mean, it sounds like it worked out well in Venezuela with capturing Maduro, but I mean, it brings up some interesting philosophical questions about letting computers and artificial intelligence make our military decisions on behalf of the United States. It does seem a little bit interesting.
Yeah, I would have to say it is pretty interesting and pretty bizarre nonetheless. I'll be entirely frank with you. I think this is a bad idea because AI can become predictable. It's going to go with whatever it thinks is the tried and true sort of a strategy or a tactic to use. And if we started to use AI decision making for all military decisions, the US military could become heavily predictable, which could be a pretty significant issue in the future. We've also been able to hear that apparently the President of the United States stated, I won't even click on it because it sends us to a video that's copyrighted, but the President of the United States stated the following. Zelensky has to get moving on making a deal, that is, because Russia wants a deal and they're dying for a deal. So apparently now the ball has been moved back onto Zelensky and the blame's been put back on the Ukrainians for the war not ending in Ukraine yet because the Russians are dying for a deal. And I don't even think I have to revisit that again, folks. I mean, hell, we've watched the Russians and the Ukrainians try and negotiate the end of the war for a year and 2.5 months. And it still is quite obvious that the Russians are the ones stopping everything because every single time the U.S. bends the arm of the Ukrainians to give another concession to the Russians to try and meet the Russians in the middle, the Russians don't budge. It was just recently the Russians said that they were going to be looking to reunite all ancestral lands to the motherland, which includes the Baltics, parts of Poland, Finland, and basically the entirety of Central Asia, and for some reason, we're still acting like a Neville Chamberlain approach to peacemaking is going to work, because clearly giving Hitler Danzig is definitely going to stop them from taking any further lands outside of Germany, although they made it clear that they were going to take further lands outside of Germany for years before that, or years before that when the Munich Conference gave away the Sudetenland, or when the Germans military annexed Austria, or anything else beyond and further than that. You know, it's like people don't really learn from history that trying to appease a country like Russia is not going to turn out too well. Russia is hell bent on achieving their aims no matter what, especially the Russian government. If that is the case, there is no way to appease these people, because once we appease them, they're going to take that mile and they're going to ask for about 10 more miles, or they're going to demand another 10 miles, or they'll take 10 miles by force, either way. So probably not a good idea to continue to try and push the Ukrainian government to try and make a deal with the Russians, but I'd also have to say that America's influence in that matter right now appears to be slimming on down a good bit, because the Ukrainian government, through Zelensky yesterday, openly stated they are not going to take any deal with the Russians unless if it's a good deal. They're going to reject every single bad deal, and they'll keep the war going as long as they need to be able to try and ensure that if any deal is made, it's going to be good and generally equally facing towards the Ukrainians and also the Russians at the same time. But with that, I hope that does address it the best I can, at least as far as those government statements go. And it's time for us, folks, to start moving on into the rest of the news that we have tonight inside of Europe and also the war in Ukraine. But before we get to that, folks, I do have to say that I am humongously appreciative of so many people who have come here to watch this stream tonight. We have had 14,000 people here at the peak of the stream, and over the course of the stream so far, 80,000 people have watched the stream in about an hour and 10 minutes. And I gotta say that that's actually pretty crazy, because I was telling Matthew before the show, I was like, I think we're probably going to like get, I was saying I would hope that we would have 60,000 people watching the first hour. We actually had, I think, 73,000 people watching the first hour,
Yeah,
which is...
it makes no sense either, because the concurrent viewership tonight was much lower than the previous night, but yet our viewership is much higher than the previous night. I make that make sense.
Yeah, make it make sense. I don't even know how in the world that works, but we did generally see that a lot of people were watching the show tonight, and I got to say that we're very appreciative of y'all, and we hope that y'all have found our news coverage and analysis fairly thoroughly researched and also covered, at least so far tonight. We're about to be getting into what is our bread and butter as far as analysis and coverage, which is pretty much Europe at this point. But before we get on into that, I do want to take a little bit of a pause for a moment to be able to answer a couple of questions before we move on into the major news that's coming out of Europe right now. And we're going to be taking 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of our news. So Matthew, what do we got?
And jumping right into our super chats, our first 3 of the first segment, then jumping right back to our big Ukraine-Russia news, we do have a very generous $50 support from none other than Hugh. And thank you very much, Hugh, for that 50, and we do appreciate that very, very much. It's very generous of you. He said first time and also a long time, and I hope this first helps the best news duo in the USA. And thank you very much for the kind words. He said from the Pittsburgh command post and LSA forever.
Hey, a humongous thanks to you for that incredible support and helping us to keep this channel running all the way from Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania. A big shout out to y'all. Y'all are the heart of American industrialism in this country, and actually where it all kicked off. Really, actually, kind of a little bit crazy to think. And I gotta say, a humongous thanks to you so much for supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. We always appreciate people for supporting this channel greatly, like you, because you help us to be able to keep this thing running every night. This channel and its live streams run ad-free and sponsor-free on these streams, and we're always greatly appreciative of folks who go over their way to support the channel, because that's the only way that we're able to turn a dime or a dollar every night to be able to pay our bills and do this as a full-time job. Is thanks to the incredible generosity of the folks of the LSA. And I gotta say, a humongous thanks to you so much once again. And also, thank you for saying that we're the best news duo in the USA. We are very honored that people think that we're some of the best out there, and we always try and make sure to work incredibly hard to try and be the best out there, because we know that a lot of y'all are putting a lot of faith and credit into what we say and what we analyze for news coverage, and we got to say that honestly it's just unbelievable to know how many people really do count on us for their news coverage every day, and we take that in high honor. So a humongous thanks to you so much once again, and with that we are on to the next one.
And jumping into our second super chat here, this one goes to none other than Mark Ead, a longtime channel legend. And thank you very much, Mark, for that $50 support. And we do appreciate that very, very much once again. He said, greetings, enforcers and enforcerettes from the South Pacific Peel, and Peel one from the chat. And gentlemen, LSA, New Zealand from the South.
And I gotta thank you massively for the support, Marky. And I gotta say a big shout out to New Zealand on the South Island. And a humongous thanks to you once again for being here with us tonight and supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we would never be able to make this channel possible. We wouldn't be able to keep it running. And I gotta say that it's an incredible and amazing thing to know that folks like you have been able and helping this channel to keep on running for months on end. We're always massively appreciative of your support. And we will make sure to peel one. That's the sound of peeling one right out of the chat. So Matthew, what do we got?
So this one here is going to go to none other than Blessed. And Blessed said, what legal justification would the U.S. have in taking out the Cuban regime? Now, that's interesting. First of all, they have to basically manufacture a justification because there is no de facto justification to go and invade or attack Cuba on its face. Because even if there are spy bases inside of Cuba, that does not justify invading a foreign country. So typically speaking, the usual MO for the U.S. government when they need to do something like this is they usually manufacture a terror threat. That's usually what they end up saying is the reason or justification for going and doing something like this. So if you want to predict what's going to happen, it's kind of hard to predict exactly what they're going to say. But if you ever hear the U.S. government say something like, oh, there's a terrorist or something that's shown up in Cuba, that's going to be a very strong indicator that they're setting forth a legal basis for attacking Cuba. So that way there is a legal justification behind it. So far, I haven't really heard that. So they haven't really taken that step just yet. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that generally to go to war with Cuba, like Matthew was saying, we would have to manufacture some sort of a reason, because we really don't have a reason right now. With the Iranians, we have a reason because they pose a significant threat to the United States national security, and they're also attempting to violate the Non-Proliferation Treaty by producing weapons grade uranium and other things. We could definitely go in on that. We could even go in on humanitarian. But with Cuba, we got to try and come up with something. Generally, the easiest one that I say that we could come up with would be military intervention in Cuba for the desperate humanitarian situation that is evolving on the island. Whether or not we're kind of helping to create that at this point, there's been a major humanitarian crisis that's been ongoing in Cuba for decades now, meaning that going down there on that grounds would be a pretty easy one to claim. Narco-terrorism, like some people are saying in the chat, is basically impossible because the Cubans really don't get involved in that much narco-terrorism, at least like, say, other countries do, like, say, the cartels inside of Mexico, or at least the larger ones like the Sinaloa, and what was the other one, man, that I keep forgetting? It's like the ICNG or something like that?
The CJNG, the most vicious.
The CJNG. It would be very easy to, say, justify something like that, fighting narco-terrorists, but on Cuba it's a much different thing. And there really isn't any other justification that we could give, because Cuba doesn't have a large military to threaten the United States with. They don't really pose a threat to U.S. national security, because they can't. They don't have an economy, so they don't really have any means or an ability to do anything that would threaten the United States. And so outside of that, we really don't have a lot to justify military action on Cuba with. Whereas one thing you could do, though, you could send a ship down there and have it sit in Havana Harbor until it gets blown up, and then you could blame the main on Spain. But we already did that in 1898, and that generally would be a little bit out of the vogue, at least at the moment. So I would say, really, like, I just got to be completely honest. I just don't really think it's a good idea to do anything with Cuba. It's not really like it's just not important enough. I know that the humanitarian situation's bad in Cuba, but the truth is that it's always been bad in Cuba. It was bad in Cuba during the Spanish-American War. That's what we justified it with back then. It was bad after the U.S. liberated Cuba from Spain, and then we created it as an independent country with the Platt Amendment and everything, which caused a lot of resentment. It was still destitute then, for the most part, outside of Havana. And then after Fidel Castro took over, it was generally still destitute, still even worse so than it was before. So do we really want to try and take on having a country like that get introduced into the broader world, and there really isn't anything that you can do to help them? Because they don't have any resources that they can use to make money. All they produce is sugar and tobacco. There's no raw ores in Cuba that could be, extracted to diversify their economy. There's basically nothing there. I mean, and also another thing is that tobacco purchases in the United States of tobacco products has significantly decreased over prior decades, meaning that there isn't a large market share to be had there. And we also generally have tariffed historically Cuban sugar for the longest period of time, for about the past 80 years. So they have no one to sell the sugar to, even if they get reopened to Western trade. And generally, the tobacco market just isn't as big as it used to be back then. So there really isn't any way for them to even be pulled out of their economic quagmire, unless if they went heavily into tourism, which then also means that they're running a monolith of a different sort economically, which is the tourist economy. And that could easily collapse if the U.S. economy goes into a recession. A lot of Americans wouldn't travel to Cuba, which then means their economy collapses again, which would then lead to the rise of radicalism again, and then they probably end up to where they are right now again. So do we really want to get ourselves involved in this whole deal right now? And to be entirely honest, I'd say no. I mean, like we were saying with Venezuela, we got plenty of bigger fish to fry out there in the world that are a lot more important to fry. And while the Cuban situation is rather unfortunate, it sadly just isn't something that is within our purview, or really an important and pressing issue to deal with right now. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address it the best I can. And big thanks to you once again for support, Mark Eden, helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, folks, it's time for us to move on into our final question of the segment, and then we're going to be moving on into the rest of the news throughout the night.
All right, so the last one of the segment goes to another longtime channel legend. It is Bobby, also known as LC39A, who throws in a very generous $100 support. And thank you very much, Bobby, for throwing in that signature $100 support. And we do appreciate that very, very much. And Bobby said, Cuba is a welfare state that the U.S. cannot afford.
That's generally, actually, that's kind of what I was saying right there in my analysis, Bobby. I would definitely agree with you, because Cuba would really only survive off of basically what we could describe as welfare. The U.S. would have to basically hand them out money to have them do anything, because there really isn't anything else that can be done. And I know a lot of people are like, well, they could produce coffee, they could make rum, but those aren't really consumer goods that make a country wealthy, especially in the modern day. In the modern day, if you wanted to see a country become wildly wealthy, they're either going to have to get hugely into tourism, which then they become an economic monolith, or they would have to really get heavily into something that's tech related, say like the manufacturing of some sort of technological components, which generally they do not have the industrial base to even get to that point, and it would take a whole bunch of money and investments by the United States to ever even get them close to trying to do that. And so, it basically would be something along the lines of having to provide significant amounts of welfare to Cuba to get them off of the ground. Because outside of that, we basically just cause a whole bunch of havoc like we are right now. We release them from the communist government, and a new government comes in, and they still really don't change a lot of anything down there. That's kind of the thing that I've got to say is a bit of the issue right now, is that if we're going to do anything with Cuba, we have to have some kind of an idea about how to pull them out of the gutter. Because why the hell would we want to collapse the communist Cuban government because they're in the gutter, to then not pull them out of the gutter after we get rid of their communist government? We're completely defeating the point of even doing anything like that at that point. But a humongous thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, Bobby. And I generally say, that right now I think we just have bigger fish to fry than Cuba. Maybe when the US has nothing going on in the future and the world is, doing nothing, maybe then we can deal with Cuba, but we just have so much stuff going on right now. It seems like a very distracted sort of a foray in foreign policy than anything that seems to have a real strategic objective or ambition to it. But a humongous thanks to you so much once again for that massive support, and I would definitely agree with you on that. And with that, folks, it's now time for us to move on out of this news and on into Europa, because we have a lot of news coming out of Europe and Ukraine. Moving us on into France, we were able to hear that Europe is sadly starting to move itself away from the United States, which we did say was going to be coming around. And the analysis was dead on the nail there. It's kind of crazy, man. We always can say the analysis was dead on the nail because we said with the way the U.S. is now recently treating Europe, Europe is easily going to pick up and walk away because they're not going to be treated like that by somebody for long. And it appears that that is the case. As the French have now
I feel
stated,
like we're turning into the president. I feel like we're turning into him. We're the best. We're always right. The analysis is always correct. I feel like we're turning into him.
I gotta be, well, I mean, we're not wrong, though. I mean, like, the thing is that we say something, we'll be like, this is what's happening, this is not good, this is what's going to happen because of that, and then it ends up being correct. Because both France and Europe, which are generally the two largest economic and military powers in Europe today, have both put out statements that are quite concerning, at least as far as the cohesion of the Western sphere, which includes Europe and the really Europe, North America, and our Eastern Pacific allies. The French President Emmanuel Macron stated today that we are conceiving a European nuclear deterrent with Germany and other states. I'll provide details in a few weeks. To give you all an understanding of what this is and what's going on with that right now, prior, the United States was the one who largely provided the nuclear deterrent for Europe. And because of the fragile situation with the United States and the significant amount of diplomatic instability, France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and a large amount of other countries are not looking at the United States anymore as a reliable ally. If anything, they're looking at the United States as a significant asset, well, no, more not an asset, but a liability to their security. So for that reason, France is now working, apparently, I would expect, with Germany, the United Kingdom, and Poland to possibly start providing an Anglo-French nuclear umbrella to the other non-nuclear countries of Europe like Germany and Poland, so that way if the entirety of the European Union is attacked at any point in the future by, say, Russia, the French will be able to provide a nuclear umbrella for the national sovereignty of Poland, Germany, and others in replacement for the United States and its ongoing nuclear umbrella. Further on, we also were able to hear that the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has said something that I'd have to say is wildly concerning, at least in the kind of messaging that this is giving. And it really is showing that Europe is about to literally just pack up and walk off, because the German Chancellor Merz here gave the current administration as much leeway as they could and tried to tolerate the idiocy the best they could, but it even seems like they've had enough, because the German Chancellor Merz has stated today at a conference that the international order based on rights and rules generally no longer exists, and that China wants to be a leader in shaping the world. The U.S. has claimed the leadership has largely been challenged and possibly even lost, which is now showing that Europe, due to the roughshotting that they got from the United States, is generally starting to create a consensus opinion in France, Germany, and basically all of the major national players that they don't really look at the United States as being the leader of a Western sphere, or more so really tending to external European affairs, where Europe generally exchanges its ability to control its own outcomes for the United States to have significant relationships with them, and the Europeans seem to be largely starting to message that they're getting ready to go it on their own, and largely go without the United States being a part of a combined Western sphere, and largely creating a European sphere in the splinter. It's something that is wildly concerning, because with this in mind, this means the United States is not going to be favored in trade agreements like we have been in the past with Europe, and this also means that the Chinese might be able to open themselves up to become Europe's largest trading partner, and also possibly even a guarantor of European military security. Now, one thing that's a little bit interesting about this, and this is what I always find to be defeating the common argument by some Americans, is that a lot of people say that Europe is nothing but a bunch of parasites and worms, and Europeans are completely worthless, and there's no reason for the United States to have any relationship with Europe, because there's nothing that we really get out of it. But the thing about that, though, is that that's assuming one thing: nobody wants to have anything to do with Europe. The problem with that is that everybody wants to have something to do with Europe, because once the United States starts to tell the Europeans that they're slimy worms that are basically worthless and nobody wants to have anything to do with them, and then Europe goes, okay, then we'll go off on our own if you think that way, the Chinese immediately come sliding in to try and replace the US's position as far as Europe's relationship with external spheres of influence are concerned. And that brings the question in, which is clearly answered by the obvious answer. Europe has a lot to provide by the relationship that they give to the United States of America, and we have a lot to provide to the Europeans in turn. It's been a heavily mutual relationship over the past 70 years. You would have to be blind to not see that. And that's why the Chinese want to replace the United States as being the general ally and partner of Europe. You don't really see anybody doing that with Russia, because Russia is economically insignificant. And you really don't see that happening with really any other countries in the world where people are dying to replace the US's position in a region, unless if you're talking about a place like Europe, because Europe has a lot of money flowing through it. If you look at the whole of the European Union, the European Union has a collective GDP as of this year of $25 trillion. The United States has a GDP of around $29 trillion. This means that the European Union is a larger economic market than China, which has a GDP of around $18 trillion right now, by quite a significant margin. And a lot of people are wondering whether or not the Germans have a lot behind their claim that the U.S. is largely starting to slip out of its position of being a leader of the free world, considering the sort of foreign policy actions that we've made as of late. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
So it is a pretty big statement that Germany made today. They basically said that the world order that existed, where the USA was the front, the head of it, is basically no longer existing. It's pretty much over. And they're saying the US might have lost their supremacy over the global situation completely, which is quite a thing to say, because that's basically saying basically a big middle finger to the USA. But what are your thoughts? 44% said they are 100% correct, while 27% said it's only partially true, and 24% said they are totally wrong. And I would say I'm with the 27%. It's only partially true. I would agree that it's strained. Like the global order that exists, I still think it personally still does exist. The U.S. is still the head of it, but it is extremely strained to almost to the breaking point, mainly because there seems to be a lot of friction amongst our allies. And I'll be perfectly honest, it's caused by us, the United States. We're the ones causing that friction. And nobody really wants to back down in the United States. So it's causing a bit of a problem, because now we're seeing Canada is running to China. We're seeing all these European countries are opening up relations with China, which is going to be to their detriment, by the way. That's not smart, but they're kind of pushed into that because they're trying to find an alternative to the United States, which seems to be fighting against the alliance, and they're trying to find someone else. And I will say, though, in the long run, it is going to bite them in the ass going to China. It's going to very much so bite them in the ass. So they may think they're getting leverage, but what they're actually doing is permanently screwing over their economies to be permanently intertwined with China, which is not even compatible with their country's systems of governance, which is quite insane. So that's why I say it's only partially true. I have a feeling the Europeans might be running back to us if we're still intact after this is all over with, and that's why I'm with the 27%. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that they're partially true. I'd have to be the 27%, because foreign policy actions by the United States have been highly unassertive, if not destructive, over the past 4 years that we've been covering the news here on this channel. During, let's see, how do I explain this? Here we go. I'll just explain it this way. During the Biden administration, Europe was basically sent out to do whatever the hell it could on its own, mostly, because the U.S. would hardly make a decision or do anything for anyone, anywhere in the world during the course of that administration. During the Trump administration, they're actively trying to screw everyone over. So it's basically the same sort of a situation. Either they're on their own by default with the prior administration, or they're getting screwed over by the current one, which doesn't put them in a good spot as far as their ongoing relations with the United States is concerned. Because we were already seeing this, by the way, folks, during the Biden administration, because the Biden administration would do just about damn near nothing when it came to anything in the world. If anything, the prevailing foreign policy then was just to sit back and not do anything, not to make a statement, not to react. It was hardly to do anything at all. The only place we saw them do anything was providing support to Ukraine. But even then, that wasn't done by the administration. That was done through congressional drawdowns done by the Congress, which the president would then rubber stamp, and then that would be done by the executive as a knee-jerk reaction to send the funding and support over. Currently, though, it's been 4 years of pretty bad foreign policy. And it's been bad enough that the Europeans might as well be on their own in prior administrations or currently are getting screwed over by another, and then it's not beneficial for them to stay around. Europe can pack up and walk away. No country is ever attached to the United States to where they cannot just walk off. And putting a nation in a position, at least in terms of talking about them, to where, oh, well, they can never walk away, that just basically makes it to where the United States can abuse all of our allies and think that we can get away with it until it's too late and they've actually packed up and walked away. Much like the United States outsourced most of its manufacturing to China, Germany, well, not only Germany, but the most of Europe can also sign off most of its trade and even its manufacturing to China as well, and basically do the same sort of a arrangement with the Chinese that we did several decades ago. So, I would generally say that they are getting partially correct, and if U.S. foreign policy doesn't change, and I don't mean change by the current administration, I mean change in general from the absolute idiocy that we've seen over the past 4 years in all foreign policy approaches, we are going to start rapidly seeing allies drop off by the wayside. And that's not going to be a good move at all for the United States because we're going to be left alone. And countries that are left alone don't really succeed. Russia is a country that's left alone and it doesn't really succeed. North Korea is a country that's left alone and it doesn't really succeed either, as well as Iran and others. A country succeeds by the sort of international relations and economic connections that we have. The United States is the master and king of such a thing, and also building countries into economic powerhouses. And I say that we need to see that our foreign policy shows that we truly appreciate our trading partners and military allies, so that way they have a reason to stick with us, because we're stronger together than we are as a separate military alliance.
Yeah, I would say so.
And so with that, folks, we are going to be moving on from those statements and into something else that is actually quite interesting. And I'll be saving this one for a minute, but also, by the way, Matthew, we're about to be moving into that war game here in a little bit. But we'll move into this one right now because we have a poll running on it. Russia has been running into some issues, big ones, I'd have to say. We have been able to hear that Russia is still trying to force all of their soldiers to get Messenger Max as of today. They still have not repealed their Telegram and WhatsApp bans inside the Russian Federation. They are still trying to force the Russian army to get Messenger Max at the moment, which means that they're still hemorrhaging on the front lines at the moment in terms of communication abilities, and the Ukrainians are running laps around them right now. Additionally, we've also been able to hear that Volodymyr Zelensky, which I didn't include the clip of today, went into an absolute rant on his show about how the Russian economy has basically truly failed and is collapsing, and that it appears that the Russian Federation is without a hope and a prayer, which is actually kind of shocking, because Volodymyr Zelensky, aka the devil as we call him, has basically been one of Russia's main propagandists and mouthpieces for years. And it even seems that the situation is becoming so bad that not even propagandists in Russia can really deny the situation, in that the war has been an absolute failure in Ukraine and has barely achieved anything, and on top of that, the Russian economy is the worst that it's ever been, except for the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, and also the post-Soviet years right afterwards. And a lot of people are wondering, if a propagandist even has to admit how bad the economy is and the fact that the Russian economy is straight up failing, which is a very good sign for us here in the West, a lot of people are wondering, is dissent imminent, considering that not even propagandists can hold back the disdain that they have for the actions that have been taken and where they've led Russia into the present day? Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
All right. So now that we've heard the devil himself, Solyev, who's the guy who likes to hop on the Russian TV show or his own internet show. I'm not even sure really what he has, but he's a lunatic and he's in Russia and he's a propagandist. He's even admitting that the Russian economy is falling apart. He's mocking the extremely high interest rates that the Russian central bank is still putting on the civilians. And he's mocking the fact that nobody can pretty much afford anything in Russia at this point, thanks to that really wonderful war that they keep waging against Ukraine. So is dissent imminent? That's the question. 59% said yes, Russia is about to become pure chaos, while 26% said it seems like the early tremors of possible civil unrest, and 11% said no, it's just controlled opposition. And I would say I'm with the 25%. This is early warning signs. This is not controlled opposition. Some people were trying to say that earlier today. I don't think it is. One thing that proves that it's not controlled opposition is the fact that the Russian government is trying to force their own military into a state-sponsored application for messaging, so that way they can monitor any type of uprising that might be taking place in the military, and thus they're going to monitor the civilian population too, to ensure that nobody's rising up. To me, that indicates that the Kremlin knows that there is rumblings of some type of civil unrest, and that's why they're taking that very drastic action. So the propagandist making these statements live on the air certainly adds credence to that theory, and that's why I think these are early warning signs. But Enforcer, what say you?
I'd have to say that I'd be with a 59%. Russia is probably about to descend into absolute chaos, probably within this year, because the economy is so bad off, nobody even in Russia can deny that anymore. It's kind of funny, though. Tucker Carlson will still tell people these days that Russia is our friend and Russia's doing fine, but even the real propagandists that are basically bankrolled by the Russian government are admitting that the Russian economy is failing. You know, it's kind of hard to be on it's kind of hard to say that a ship is sailing fine when the ship is sinking while you're on it, you know? So I would say that Russia is definitely about to be getting into an absolute state of chaos here incredibly soon, and that's also why we're seeing that they're still pushing Messenger Max onto the public and the military, because they want to be able to track the growing dissent and put it down before it becomes an issue, and allowing them to basically surveil everyone's communications within Russia instantaneously. It definitely allows for them to be able to pick out any problem groups or problem people and make sure to silence them, either by killing them or putting them in prison before they can become a larger issue for the Russian government. So I would be with a 59% without a doubt. But moving us on out of Russia for a moment and circling back into something that we were able to hear about in NATO today, this is something that was wildly shocking, and this is something that I have to say is really crazy because I didn't even expect this one myself. NATO actually conducted a war game and military exercise with some Ukrainian forces that had been transported into a NATO state. We didn't really get to hear exactly what NATO state they were in, but the Ukrainian armed forces were engaged in a war game against two NATO battalions. These two NATO battalions, from what we understand, were pitted against two Ukrainian battalions of similar size and structure. And in just one day during the exercises, they were able to win an absolute victory against the two NATO battalions in the war game due to their massive advantages in drone warfare technology. This is something that is shocking. I'd have to even admit this is shocking to myself. Because while I've been saying that the Ukrainian armed forces are good, but they aren't the best in the world, they basically just went and beat some of the best militaries in the world, which are that of the NATO armed forces. The NATO armed forces are the best equipped, best funded, best trained, and best paid that you could find really anywhere in the world. And that's not just speaking for the United States, that's speaking for the British, the French, the Germans, the Poles, the Baltic states, the Scandinavian nations, Finland, and basically every other NATO state. I mean, the militaries in NATO are world class, top notch, and the Ukrainians just went and absolutely beat the brakes off of two NATO battalions in a war game, hands down within the first day of engaging them, which is giving us an idea that NATO is falling rapidly behind in terms of modern warfare doctrine by not implementing drone warfare at a rapid pace. Not only that, the Ukrainian armed forces are also showing that their drone doctrine, not only the use of drones as a new technology emerging in warfare, but their doctrine of how to use those drones is world class. Apparently some of the best that's seen out there. The only other country out there that uses drone warfare at a heavy scale is the Russians. And the only reason the Russians are using drone warfare is because the Ukrainians were beating the brakes off of them when they weren't using drones. So if the Ukrainians are beating the Russians in a war as far as drone warfare is concerned, and the Russians are now the second best country in the world by default in drone warfare because they're basically the only one that does it at scale, that means that the Ukrainians are truly a world-class military at this point, at least in the terms of the doctrine that they use in a conventional war. And that also means that we have a lot to learn from them, and we also need to start implementing a lot of their doctrinal strategies and also technologies into our armed forces to see a similar level of success if we go up against a country that heavily uses drone warfare. And this is leading a lot of people to wonder, what does this mean? Does this mean that the Ukrainians are just simply world class, truly maybe even the best in the world at this point in fighting a war? Does this mean that NATO is woefully underprepared and, you know, the Ukrainians, while having drone warfare, is pretty good, that more so is just showing that NATO is wildly unprepared? Or are a lot of people trying to say that it's just a simulation and it doesn't really impact much of how a war would really be fought? And Matthew, what are people thinking about that? And what are you thinking about that as well?
Oh, and it looks like this poll is almost evenly split. So now that we've heard this really bombshell report that 2 NATO battalions got their asses whooped by the Ukrainians in just 24 hours in military exercises, what the hell does that mean for us? Are we screwed? And 43% said Ukraine is simply really that good. And, if they went up against anybody, they'd be whooping tail. 40% also said NATO is woefully unprepared, and that's why they got their asses handed to them. And 14% said it's a simulation, it's not reality. And the simulation is set up to be like a real deal situation. So it's generally close to the real thing. So you can take this to the bank that Ukraine is doing some good work here. But what does it mean for NATO? Is NATO so bad off that we need to freak out? Or is it just that Ukraine simply bested them because NATO's a little bit rusty? Which one is it? Unfortunately, I think the problem is NATO has gotten caught lacking. For some reason, the West is having a very hard time adapting to drone warfare. I don't know why that is. I don't know why we're so far behind the curve. That's a question that many people have been asking for a long time. But even the U.S. is far behind on drone warfare. They're just now starting to equip certain units in the Marines and the Army with actual drones, which is far behind what even the Ukrainians are doing with only a fraction of the budget. So it's really more of a planning and training issue more than a money problem. That's the reality of it. And I'm just not really sure why we're behind the curve, like I said. But I'm with the 38%. As it stands right now, NATO appears to be woefully unprepared to deal with this. And if they can't take on Ukraine, that means they probably going to have a hard time with Russia if they try to do something. So, Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say that I'd actually be with the 44%. I think that the Ukrainians are just simply pretty good at fighting a conventional war, because drill in generally war games and such, that's one thing that generally sees a decent amount of value and a decent amount of training really emphasized in that. And let me get that bot really quickly. But beyond that, there's a decent amount of value to be had in war games and normal military exercises and usual training, but there's also a greater issue to be had in the fact that that doesn't really accurately portray what a war really is. And sadly, the only way to really learn how a war is fought when the next war is fought is by having a whole bunch of guys die in it and then figuring it out that way, or having such surefire strategies and tactics that doesn't happen and you basically just wipe the floor against someone else. That also is highly likely as well. But outside of that, I would say that at the moment, I think that the Ukrainians, considering that they're battle-hardened, every single unit in the Ukrainian army is a battle-hardened and well-experienced unit in how frontline warfare is actually conducted. I think that they are generally just beating the brakes off of NATO forces because they're just simply very damn good at fighting a war, because they are still in the midst of fighting one, and they've been fighting one for 4 years, meaning that a lot of their tactics are grounded in real realities instead of what is thought up at, say a war game or a military exercise here in NATO. And that also means that their tactics and doctrines are well matured and are very well thought out and practiced. So I'd actually just say that if anything, the Ukrainian doctrine is wildly matured. But there's also another thing that I have to add in as well, is that a lot of the details of this war game and also the handicaps that were given out to both sides weren't known. Because if NATO was able to use its aircraft in that war game, it's highly likely, and I'm not sure if they were able to, but if we were able to use aircraft in that war game, it is highly likely that the Ukrainian forces would have lost, because that's really where NATO exceeds. It doesn't really exceed in direct infantry on infantry conflict like we saw in this war game. It really more so exceeds in air superiority, completely obliterating an enemy before the infantry even engage them, and then the infantry are basically there to deal with the scraps. That's really what NATO doctrine revolves around for every country in the alliance. And if we weren't able to use any air power against the Ukrainians in that military exercise, it is highly likely that that's the reason why NATO forces lost, because they're really not designed to engage a fully intact infantry unit against their own fully intact infantry unit. That basically would never happen in a normal NATO conflict using NATO doctrine. So we don't know that. So I would generally say that it just kind of shows that as far as infantry on infantry warfare is concerned, the Ukrainians are truly world class. But I'd also have to say that it might not show everything as far as NATO being underprepared, because if we went up to war against the Russians would lose that war pretty quickly, just because they wouldn't be able to defend their airspace. And if you can't defend your airspace, you're basically done for. But moving on from that, and on out of that bit of interesting news that came out of NATO, we are going to be moving on into Ukraine, and particularly all of the news that we've gotten out of the Ukraine war today. Starting us off in Moscow, we were able to see that a Russian youth set a gas station on fire. This was actually released by the Russian Russian Federation's governmental apparatus. Let's see how they set this gas station on fire. Oh, there's
This is the Benz market. That's where you go get a Benz.
Oh,
Oh,
dang, man.
Oh, these youth. Look at that youth.
Oh, those youths. But moving on out of Moscow, we also got to see that there was a ongoing drone threat in basically every oblast. There were drone threats that were alerted in temporarily occupied Crimea, Moscow, Kursk, Oryol, Bryansk, Belgorod, Kaluga, Ryazan, Voronezh, and also within Luhansk. Basically everywhere. Nice to see again. Voronezh was hit overnight, and there was a large fire that was documented within the area, which you can see right here. You can also see the fire in this image. Nice to see. Moving us on from that clip and further on down and into the area of Rostov-na-Donu, we also got to see that there was a little bit of damage caused in Rostov-на-Дону.
Горит тут, повзрывалось. Там горит.
It's
Машины
smoking
стоят
nice.
вот здесь, вот возле ленты.
Oh, look, Ukrainian colors.
Короче, досталось тут. И дом соседний, где мы снимаем квартиру, там прям в дом взорвалось, где-то этаж 15. Там сейчас пожарки, люди, мы оттуда выбежали.
Now we got another yapper, damn. Man, here we have the fire. Look at this burning is cooking. Oh my
That
god,
sounds
look.
going 100 miles an hour, I tell you.
Man, honestly. Also, here's what the building looks like after. We can see that the roof apparently collapsed in some areas due to the veracity of the fire, which is nice to see. Moving us on out of that bit of news, we believe it was a drone factory, by the way, just to add that into the coverage as well. It's now time for us to move on into Ukraine. Now, we were able to see this interesting clip of an F-16 shooting down drones with probably the most overkill missile that they could have, the AIM-120. Because the AIM-120 is generally not used in close-range engagements. You generally use an AIM-9. But apparently they ran out of AIM-9s in this F-16. They started to lob AIM-120s at the drone. So here's that clip. There's the F-16. And here goes the AIM-120 in just a second. Oh, get the camera on him. Keep the camera steady. Okay, there we go. And there goes the AIM-120. Oh, and a dead-on hit.
Oh, spending that cash.
Man, I love the AIM-120s. What a cool missile. But I'd say that for a shot like less than a mile away from the aircraft, that is like extreme overkill. These things have a range of about 70 to 100 miles in normal air engagement, so it is really crazy to see one used at a mile away, just basically point blank for this type of missile. But moving on from that, we also were able to see that within the area of the South Koreans and their intelligence is apparently reporting that the North Koreans have taken some significant losses in Russia. According to their intelligence, the North Koreans lost about 6,000 soldiers inside of Kursk, and this was also reported by the Yonhap agency, citing data from South Korean intelligence. According to South Korea's intelligence, at present, there are about 11,000 North Korean soldiers still in Russia. They just don't create the wake that they used to when they first arrived. Of them, approximately 10,000 are of regular army units, and about 1,000 are from an engineering unit, meaning that they're operating in detachments that are not at the regimental level like they usually operate from. About 1,100 soldiers returned to North Korea in December, but according to intelligence estimates, they may have just been sent back to Russia again, so they basically didn't get to take any leave. They're basically on a death march at this point. They're going to keep fighting or operating in Russia until they get killed one day. So a little bit interesting with that, and it does appear that at the moment, the North Koreans, they're not having a good time, at least the ones that were sent out to, Ukraine. And there's
How the hell does the death march go? Like, what kind of like cadence and what kind of songs are they singing during that?
Man, let's see here, man. I am a North Korean, and I am here to die. Man, I guess that's what it is. I don't know.
Man, I'll tell you what, these guys right here, I think they took them off the front line, though. Like, I think the 10,000 that are left here inside of Kursk, I think they're generally probably just, like, support troops. They suck so bad. They lost 6,000 guys. They had to be taken off the front lines. They were such a disaster. Not only were they dying in mass numbers, but they were tripping over the feet of the Russians and getting them butchered, too, because they didn't know what they were doing.
Man, I remember when they used to have those massed infantry charges up near Suja in the Kursk Oblast. That was a trip, folks. Actually watching like a World War I era over-the-top charge across no man's land. And they would end as badly as y'all would all think. I mean, they would get wiped away before they even made it to the Ukrainian lines and the other trees. It was ridiculous, really. And that was supposedly one of North Korea's most elite units. So you can only imagine what a normal North Korean unit would be like. Actually, funnily enough, folks, we can actually get an idea, because according to defectors from the Korean People's Army in North Korea, they stated that their training only existed of being provided 3 rounds of ammunition per year for small arms training, and they would never give them ammunition, and they basically would never even let them have their rifles, even when they were close or on the DMZ in most positions, because the North Korean government was so scared that if they gave these guys rifles or ammunition, they were immediately going to turn against the North Korean government. So basically, most of these guys have never had any experience with actually using their rifles, much less any other equipment. So they're pretty bad off. They're basically a military in name only, but outside of that, it's more so an enforcement apparatus inside of North Korea, and is not really used in conventional war at all, or would be effective in a conventional war.
Yeah, I would say so. Also, by the way, another reason these guys failed tremendously is because for the first time ever in their lives, when they got to Russia, they had access to the World Wide Web, which is disastrous for very socially starved North Koreans, because they immediately went to the internet and started looking up exotic pictures. And it turns out they kind of got addicted to these exotic pictures, and that took up pretty much all of their time. So outside of tripping and falling and, dying on the front lines and unseen, ghastly numbers, then they would go back and get right back on the phone and go look at these pictures and stuff like that. So it was just a bad thing.
Man, some North Koreans said, "Oh, whoa, look at this phone. Hey, what are you pulling up over there?" Big booty Latinas. Man, it's like, oh.
Man, the Wicked West deployed their most potent weapon, exotic pictures on the phone.
Man, the North Koreans are like, so this is what I've been missing out. I was like, oh, well, I was like, I mean, honestly, apparently, folks, the biggest weapon for North Korean soldiers is just exposing them to anything in the Western world at all. It's like exposing a medieval peasant to like a nacho-flavored Dorito. It will blow their mind. It really will. But anyways, moving on from that, and on out of Kursk, it is time for us to imagine, folks, if the North Koreans had access to television and they watched the halftime show of the Super Bowl. I wonder what would have happened. I wonder what would have happened to him. But anyways, moving on from that and on into our the rest. A bowl? We have a bowl? We have a bowl. And also, it appears that a lot of people are talking about those North Koreans and the amount of them that were wounded and killed. And Matthew, what are people thinking about those North Koreans? And what are you thinking about them?
So why are they doing this? Why is Kim Jong-un doing this to his men? Because his men are clearly, at this point, they're being used as support troops, meaning they're like the janitors for the Russians. 10,000 of them are apparently doing that duty, while 6,000 of them just became casualties on the front line. Sorry about laughing, by the way. I'm trying to like stifle a laugh here. Someone said something a little bit wild in the chat I've never really heard of before, which is insane. But ignoring that for a second and trying to compose myself, 49% of the audience said North Korea is just trying to appease Putin's wishes, and that's why they're still sending troops to their death or to their janitorial duties in Russia. 27% said North Korea is doing it for propaganda, so that way they can say the glorious Kim has won a war. 18% said North Korea is just trying to let them learn. So unfortunately, they're not learning very much because they already knew how to use a mop. That's something that they did automatically. They don't learn anything on the front lines because they don't survive long enough to bring any of that knowledge back. So it's appeasing Putin's wishes. I'll just leave it at that. But Enforcer, what say you?
Man, is it the comment from Looking Glass that was the one that was getting you busting out laughing?
Possibly so. I didn't really see the username. I saw the comment and I almost lost it.
It's the one that says adult industry defeated North Korea like Little Kim defeated anorexia. Is it that one?
Oh, yeah, it could be, yeah.
Bro, honestly, man, that's the quote of the year right there, at least for now. I gotta say, that was a pretty good joke right there. I like that one. That's a top one. But outside of that, I would say that North Korea is just North Korea is really doing it for propaganda. I mean, they're not really doing it to help out the Russians per se. Because here's something that's actually a little bit interesting, folks. Because the only insight that we have in North Korea is what defectors from North Korea are able to say about it. And interestingly enough, a lot of North Koreans don't really look at Kim Jong Un with the same kind of reverence that they looked at Kim Jong Il and Kim Il Sung, who were like the original Kims. Because Kim Jong Un really didn't have anything to do with the nation's independence or struggling through hardship with the nation to get them somewhere else to some other point. And Kim Jong Un had no connection with that. Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il did. Kim Il Sung was, at least according to the North Korean myths that they've created these days, he was basically the guy who liberated North Korea back then. And Kim Jong Il was, you know, his little boy, his son, who helped him out as well, at least a little bit back then. But he was hardly even that old when all that was going on. But that's beside the point. However, though, with Kim Jong Un, he wasn't born in any of that. He didn't do any of that, and therefore, a lot of North Koreans don't really look at him as great a Kim as the prior Kims. So for that reason, Kim Jong-un might have asked the Russians to allow them to send some North Koreans into Kursk so they can make this whole propaganda thing to make it look like Kim Jong-un is not just fighting the wicked American imperialists and also South Korea to keep Korea independent, but now he's bringing the fight to the entirety of the Western world in a far-flung corner of the globe, so that way he can look like he's not only, up there with his prior Kims, but he's even better than them because he's trying to fight the entirety of the Western world at large, no matter where they are. So that might be a part of it. And so I would say that it's more so for propaganda than anything. Because if Putin really was honest, he doesn't want North Koreans. Like they suck. They're terrible at fighting a war. They don't know how to fight a war. And so who the hell will want them? I mean, Putin more so wants their munitions, not their men. Because if they just get the munitions from the North Koreans, the Russians will be able to use them a lot more effectively than the North Koreans ever would. So the whole North Korean manpower side of things is sending them to the front. That was more so for the propaganda initiative of it than anything. But moving on from that, we do have to get back into the rest of Russia, because in Belgrade we were able to see that the situation is still bad. It's quite bad.
Был на балконе в этот момент, когда...
You see this guy out here, he's looking up into the commune blocks. He's like, the stuff's bad out here. We can also see out here that there was apparently a direct impact onto a building. Terrible.
It just blew out the side, look.
How sad, bleed. Oh, another little air attack.
Little rinky-dink siren.
Keep quiet. The missiles won't hear you.
Don't move. It's like a velociraptor. It's like...
Man, turn that noise down. I can't see.
The bass is too loud.
It's so bright, I can't hear anything.
Oh, and then you're hammering them. Ooh.
Pounding them.
Man, Ivan and his boys are up there on their tiny town, and they were getting pounded. Man, like, yo, gotta have them ribs.
And something, too.
Yeah, man, you don't want to ask for that something would. Well, moving on from that clip, we also got some fresh ones. Let me get you all to these as well. We were able to see that down missile that fell onto a house. Bleed from another angle. And additionally, last but not least, we were able to hear the explosions in Belgrade from another angle.
I was just thinking for a second. With as much strikes and pounding that Belgrade gets on a regular basis, it's so disproportionate. Like the Ukrainian attacks on Belgrade versus other Russian cities. It's just like, whenever there's like Ukrainian anger, like those stupid Russians are getting us. Hit Belgrade. Belgrade gets hit every time. It's like a punching bag.
The Russians would have to learn. I'm Belgrade for the 90th time.
The Belgrade citizens are like, oh my God, not again. Why us every time?
Man, let's see. Let me see if I can pull this up. Dude, this at this point, man, is what Belgrade looks like every time they hear Zelensky go, the Russians will have to learn their lesson again. That's what they look like. They're like, no, please. Man, like,
Oh, man.
enough, I beg of you.
Oh man! And then the Ukrainians bombed the place so hard, it's like it's louder than a clapped out boosted Civic. It's really loud.
Man, Belgrade's giving giving Detroit a run for its money these days with how much brap brap is going on out there in the streets. I mean, damn. But also getting us back into that clip, you can hear a little bit more of it. Not sounding good in Belgrade, at least at the moment. And we also got to see that down near the Shebekino Highway, there was also some damage down here as well. Take a look at that.
Oh wow! They're putting cope cages around their gas stations. Look at that! It's like the whole thing's covered in a cope cage.
Yeah, you want to know why? There's evidence as to why on this burnt-out sign at the gas station as to why they put up the nets.
Damn. I guess all they lost was the sign. I guess that's a positive thing. I guess they couldn't quite get the gas station from the looks of it.
Man, they were like, the Russians would have to learn. Hit the gas station sign and send them a message. Man, it's like, man, real. But moving on out of that, it's time for us to get on into our location unknowns. We were able to see that the French are going to be providing even more hammer. And this is what a hammer looks like, by the way, folks. This is a test of one. Y'all want to see what it looks like when it's tested? I'll show y'all. Let me show y'all right down here. This is the hammer on a rocket sled, and it was flung into a concrete wall to kind of show the penetration and explosive damage that a hammer has. And there's the impact. Pretty cool. But the Ukrainians will be getting a load of these from the French. About 260 million euros worth of them. We also got to see that apparently the Ukrainians put out some videos today of them preparing their liutis to visit all of the wonderful people of Russia. Oh, look at
man,
that.
they got the little RC controller out. They're going at it.
Man, look at that. Like, are our liutis ready to obliterate another refinery? Yeah? All right, let's send them. And then they send them on their way. We also got the Russian casualty report for the past 24 hours as well. And holy moly, goodness gracious, no Bobcats lost, but Ms. Decent Keeper of the Records did state that 1,239 drones is its fifth highest daily loss, and troop losses are averaging under 1,000 these days. And moving us on into the past 24 hours in the casualty report, we were able to see that 800 Russian soldiers were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 5 main battle tanks, 3 APCs, 41 artillery pieces, 1 MLRS, 1 air defense system, 1,239 drones, 16 cruise missiles, and 127 supply trucks and fuel trucks. Overall, not too bad. Pretty good to see. Moving us on from that and on down into the front, we were able to see near Lehman that the Ukrainians were hitting some Russian forces and chasing them through the woods. This Russian tripped like he was in a horror movie. Well, they treat them like it's Friday 13th, because it is the Friday the 13th, Juliet. Oh, I guess you could say it was a bad day for the Russians, because, I just realized, man, it really is the Friday the 13th today.
Man, it's the 13th, and Freddy Krueger is on the prowl.
Man, also, man, this guy must have really known that he was screwed, because if you watch this clip right here, there's another drone that was circling this guy along with this one.
Man, it's like the Sharks.
Man, he was like, no. And it's like, well, he shouldn't have been in the Russian army. He could have fled, Could have surrendered. Oh, they got the Desert Cross. Ooh. Bliat. This guy, he realized the last second.
Damn.
He's trying to make it. Slip and fall school. That's what I did up there in the mountains. We can see them hitting a lot of. Ooh.
Oh, dear.
Oh, dear. I'm telling you, when you watch these clips, you can kind of realize why NATO lost in a military exercise, because the Ukrainians are this vicious with hunting down individual soldiers and knocking them out. You can imagine how efficient they were against NATO forces, considering that this sort of drone warfare and the tactics involved are pretty much foreign to most NATO forces.
Yeah, nobody ever expected to see these little things just popping up and running people down and stuff. You can't escape it.
Man. This guy, man, a lot of them go to slip and fall school, apparently, on how to, slip and fall all the time. Oh, this guy went to crawling school. This guy went to tarp school. This guy went to running school. This guy went to flagging himself with a rifle school. And that's the end of the clip. But moving on from that and on out of the Lehman front, we also were able to see down in Konstantinivka that a soldier of the 24th Brigade was able to shoot down a drone easy peasy. Oh, look, a
This
drone.
sounds like Chirac.
Man, straight up. Oh, do you hear that? It's a drone. Oh my god, and he got...
Oh, the
was
birds.
mine.
The birds. Oh, that was an American over there.
Whoa! Was that an American? Let's listen, folks. Was that Mountain Dew Call of Duty speak?
It was mine.
That was an
Oh,
American!
yeah. Hell yeah, bro. He has that warrior ethos. I can tell he's an American for show.
Hell yeah, brother! God bless the Super Bowl, brother! But anyways, moving on from that clip and on down the front and into Berkrovsk, we also were able to see the Ukrainians really giving them a piece of it down here. We were able to see the Ivan Franco group making sure to really give them the Franco. Call them Ivan Frico, the way they be freaking out on these Russians with these drones. Ah!
Look at him, Ivan Franco, looking over the scene with the mustache. They're doing work down there. Look at this. Look at them go.
Oh, man. Ooh! That was a loaded truck of guys. Call it Five Guys Burgers and Fries because they just got charbroiled.
That's a loaded question. Loaded baked potato fries.
Man, goodness gracious.
Give them this drone animal style.
Give them this drone with extra fries. And when I mean fries, I mean the Russians in the back. Fry them up. Like, it's like, man.
We want
tough.
this meal served 4x4 on the raft and make it swim.
You know, if you go down to the Dnieper River, you can actually make them swim.
Oh man, this humor right here. This is getting crazy.
Oh, man, I'm telling you. Oh. I don't even know what the hell that
Oh.
was. That was very confusing looking.
That was the chopped up lot that went to the chop shop.
Man, that thing is chopped. Man, like straight up.
Man, chopped.
Man, these chopped let's see, cars. Like, but anyways, moving on from that, we also were able to see the 68 Jaegers doing some work down here as well. Take a look at this new Udachny. Man, they put up their handle at Jaegers 68. Get him, boy. Man, look at that. They about to really get him. They about to get this wagon on the back of this crappy car. Oh, actually, it's an ATV, sorry. Bink!
Oh.
Right on the steering column. Oh.
Oh, they found some.
Oh, they getting them. Oh, they getting them. Oh, lordy. Ooh.
Look at these Mad Max mobiles. That looks like a combination between a Willys Jeep and a Chinese Bing Shaling thing from like the Temu or something. This thing right here don't know what it is.
Man, this thing is rough.
Look at it.
Oh.
Damn. It's like a backwards Willy Jeep ATV.
Man, I gotta say, man, rest in pieces. But with that in mind, folks, it's now time for us to move on up to Kyiv for me to drop the bombshell. There sadly was no speech from Zelensky today. No speech! No
Damn.
peach!
I will replace Zelensky and give a speech that we'll remember for the wrong reasons.
I have to say, Ukrainsky, Ukrainki, today we put a spanking on Big Beach Putin and his gang of liars. We dropped another bomb on the refinery, and we also went and we obliterated a couple of electrical grids to teach them a lesson. We also bombed Belgorod just to remind those assholes we still don't like them, because F Belgorod. Belgorod is lame.
I have a direct quote.
We have made compromises, many compromises. Putin and his friends are not in prison. This is the biggest compromise that the world has already made.
We have made compromise, many compromise, by dealing with stupid Western politicians. Very compromise, much wow. Now we move on to Russians and we teach them lesson. We go to NATO military exercise. We style on them bitches to teach them who they're messing with. Like we teach everyone who they're messing with now. But beyond that, it is time for us to move on into the second segment of the stream.
We have a breaking news, as breaking the stream. We're going to give out 3 tap dancing lessons to the Russians, free of charge.
You know, we like to say in Ukraine, we are blowing away the Russians, much like the Kardashians, but they do it for different reasons. Outside of that, though, it is time for us to move on into the second segment of this stream, because it is time to talk to each and every one of you. And if you've ever heard Zelensky talk in English, he talks exactly like this. So go pull it up and listen. It's actually kind of a little entertaining. But anyways,
Matthew, what do we got?
Honestly, like, I know people generally find impressions to be like mocking somebody, but with Zelensky being a former comedian and also being an actor, I actually think he would find that funny, actually. At least I would hope, because he generally has that comedic bone in his body. You know, he used to, I think he went to law school, then he was a comedian, then he was the president, then he was an actor. Yeah, I mean, he's been a lot of stuff, so I think he would find it funny. But anyways, jumping into our final question segment of the night, it's time to get our super chats, live chats, and more code decoders of the stream, and let's go ahead and jump right into it. And our first one goes to Ven Dog, and thank you very much, Ven, for that $50 support, and we do appreciate that very, very much. He said, do you think the strategy of the U.S. is to systematically weaken and take out China's allies so we can one day focus solely on them?
I think it is not necessarily the case with that. I don't really know what the well, actually, we kind of do know what it is, because according to the National Defense Strategy of 2026, the plan is for the U.S. to basically give up everything everywhere and let everyone do whatever they want, except for the Americas, and then we're going to run the Americas with an iron fist. That is generally the National Defense Strategy that was laid out recently, because if you read about it and what we're doing in Europe and Asia, the plan is to basically do nothing, or to greatly reduce the amount of U.S. forces that are present there, or to completely hand stuff over to other countries, like, say, just hand over European affairs to Europe entirely and not even be involved. So, you know, you could kind of try and make that claim, but according to the National Defense Strategy, we have absolutely no shot really at trying to do that. It's more so just disjointed sort of actions that end up going against America's enemies, but the enemies that we end up picking fights with are enemies that really aren't that important, and we're kind of misprioritizing things, in my opinion. Like, Venezuela and Cuba are absolutely bottom of the barrel priorities, and they never should have really been a big issue to even bring up right now. Our big priorities are the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese directly, because they're directly threatening strategic locations that we're already in control of, that we need to stay in control of. Like, Iran threatens all of the oil production in the Middle East that we generally have aligned on our side. The Chinese generally threaten Taiwan, which produces most of the semiconductors within the Western world, and they also threaten South Korea and Japan, which are the only 2 major shipbuilders in the world that are not Chinese. As far as Russia is concerned, they threaten the European Union, which is the largest trading bloc that we have dealings with around the world, and they're also the largest military and economic power that we're allied with as a full bloc. So generally, I would say that you could kind of try and make that claim, but in my honest opinion, I just think it's really hard-pressed to make it, because if we were really trying to put the Chinese at a severe disadvantage, we would make sure to keep a unified sphere of influence and also continue to grow our international dominance like we have been over prior decades, to see that the Chinese are basically encircled and completely isolated by the overwhelming amount of U.S. forces that are surrounding them at any given year. So I hope that is addressed it the best I can, but a huge thanks to you once again for the support, Ben Dog, and help with this channel to keep it running. And I hope that addresses that somewhat well. That's, of course, my opinion on foreign policy, and some people give different opinions on foreign policy, but generally I try and look out for what's best for the country, which, you know, it is what it is. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on and into, you know, the next question.
Yes, and moving on from that one, and once again, a big shout out to Vin for that support. Also, by the way, I wanted to tell y'all something, because we have a lot of Utah viewers out here in Salt Lake City. I actually experienced our first earthquake out here in Salt Lake City today. It was a small one. It was a 3.6. But I was sitting on my couch and I was watching some TV. I just got done eating dinner. I'm getting ready to start preparing the polls and doing research for the stream on my side of things. And I was sitting on the couch and I started feeling like I was not really stable anymore. And at first, because I've never experienced an earthquake, I was sitting there on the couch. I was thinking, oh damn, I think this might be the big one. I was like, I might be having a stroke or something. Like I feel like I'm wobbling. And it didn't really set in until I heard the walls cracking and I heard the walls start snapping and popping. And I was like, okay, I'm not having a stroke or a health issue. I think there's an earthquake happening. And it only lasted for about 10 seconds. It was a small one, 3.6. It shook the walls and felt like the windows made some noise too coming out of it, but very small. But what's interesting is Utah's been having a few earthquakes, actually. There was a second earthquake just 2 weeks ago down toward Lehigh, which is toward Provo, if you know where that is, around Salt Lake City. I didn't feel that one. I felt the one today, which was quite interesting. So very interesting stuff. It seems like Salt Lake City and that area, that fault line, appears to be becoming sort of active in the recent months or so. But it really honestly wasn't that bad. Like I'd rather deal with the earthquakes like this than deal with these deadly tornadoes that we used to deal with in the South. We almost got taken out several times by tornadoes. Those were very precarious and a lot more dangerous than an earthquake, in my opinion. But unfortunately, you didn't feel it down your way, did you?
No, I didn't feel it at all. I was actually in the middle of working, and Matthew was calling me up while I was trying to like rush to get everything done. He was like, "Man, there was an earthquake. Did you feel it?" I was like, "Nah, not really." I was like, still putting together the stuff for the map. I was like, "Not really, man." I was like, "It's kind of crazy though. Was it wild?" He was like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." I was just working away. I never felt it. Like nothing happened here at all. Actually, in my part of the HQ, nothing happened whatsoever.
Yeah, it was interesting. I've experienced a small earthquake, like very, very small tremors from one that happened in Tennessee when we used to live in Alabama, but it was barely anything. The one today you could actually feel it, like didn't mistake it. Once you heard the walls crack, I immediately knew it was an earthquake. I was like, I was like, let's see if this gets any larger. And it didn't. It just stopped after 10 seconds. I was like, oh, well, that was nothing, basically. But what was wild is apparently out here in Utah, earthquakes don't happen that often because people started panicking. Like, I heard people honking. All the neighbor apps were like blowing up with notifications of people freaking out in all caps that there was an earthquake happening. I'm like, it wasn't even that bad. I'm like, I've never really experienced an earthquake before, and it really wasn't that serious to me. I was like, now if it was double or triple that size, I'm not sure if my place is going to hold up because my place was already cracking and feeling like it was going to fall apart just from that little bitty thing. So, next time I might go outside and get the hell away from the building next time.
You know what's crazy though, folks, is that if you look at this map here, I wanted to show you this view of the United States at night from space. What's crazy is that the Salt Lake City area that we're in is if you see my mouse cursor on the screen, by the way, you'll see it, but it's this little lighted blob right here. That's where we're at. Up there on the very northern tip, that's Ogden, and at the southern end, that's Provo. And basically for hundreds of miles in every other direction, there's basically nobody. And when I mean nobody, there's I think about 100,000 people or a couple of 100,000 that are spread out around the rest of the state, but it's not really that many people. So it's really crazy, when we talk about, what's going on out here, because basically, compared to everyone else, we're living in a flat-out bubble out here. There's nothing else around here like there is in the East Coast. If you're in the East Coast, there's endless amounts of anything that's effective. So, if an earthquake hit Atlanta, people in Athens, people in Macon, Columbus, Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, Chattanooga, so on and so forth, they're all getting affected, or there's at least a lot of towns nearby where people are getting affected. Out here in Salt Lake City, it's literally just stuff happens here, and then that's it, and there's no one else around, so it's just a Salt Lake thing, which is really interesting. You know what's even crazier, folks, is that, when you, I'll be honest with y'all, folks, living in Salt Lake City is almost like living in a video game map, just to be entirely honest, because the whole of the Salt Lake City area, not including Ogden and Provo, is literally contained within this mountain bowl. And then the Salt Lake is to the northeast of that, the northwest of that. So when you're here and you're driving around the city, you basically feel like you're in a little video game map because it's like there's nothing else that exists outside of Salt Lake. And basically there isn't really anything that exists outside of Salt Lake, because if you drive outside the city, it's literally just nothing but emptiness for hundreds of miles until you get to Las Vegas, Boise, or Denver.
Yeah, I will say this though, like outside of like the Salt Lake City area, which is very cool, by the way, I do agree. I'm kind of curious about what a larger earthquake feels like. I know it's kind of like a strange thing to say, but I don't want one to happen, obviously, because it might damage people's houses and stuff. But if one just happened to happen, I would be actually kind of curious to see what a big one felt like one that was like double the size of the one that happened today. It honestly, it really didn't scare me that much. I mean, now the only thing that does have me slightly worried is about how my place is going to hold up against something like that because I'm not totally sure if they're building stuff to earthquake code out here. I'm not sure how that really works out here because I've never really studied it. But I'm not sure if it's a good thing to hear like the walls cracking, like in a small little 3.6 earthquake. I'm not sure if that's a good sign. But if as long as the place holds up good, I'm like I'll be fascinated to feel it because it was very intriguing, like to feel the ground under your feet just like moving like that and just to shake like without making any movement at all. It was very odd. Like I've never really felt anything like that. So, I mean, I don't wish for a disaster like that, but I'll be curious if it ever happened.
But I also got to say, folks, that large earthquakes around the Salt Lake area are generally, from what I know, a little bit more uncommon. Like, I can actually pull up a list of, let's see, large earthquakes, Salt Lake City, because the little Mormon temple, and when I mean little, I think it's like one of the I think it's the largest one in the world actually, but the quote unquote little Mormon temple down here, this thing was built starting I think in the 1860s and it was completed in like the 1890s or the very early 1900s. It has stood without any earthquake reinforcement or earthquake architecture since it was completed in 1890, and there's never been a large earthquake that has ever damaged a structure since then. So earthquakes that are large in Salt Lake City are pretty much unheard of. The biggest one that happened, at least recently, according to AI, was on March 18th of 2020, which was a 5.7. But that was pretty much the biggest one that's happened in any recent amount of time. As a matter of fact, it appears to be the only big one that people have ever talked about happened in 2020, which was 6 years ago. So,
They,
and
they say a big one's coming. Like I've heard that for a long time. But the problem is though, like I don't put a whole bunch of stock into it. It could happen. If it happens, just whatever. But they say that there's like a mega quake or something coming for the area. But they say that about everything. They always say, oh, there's a mega quake coming. Oh, there's a mega tornado coming in the south. Oh, there's a mega tsunami coming for Thailand. It's like, I mean, technically anything's possible. I mean, eventually the broken clock will be right. Eventually. So I hope this isn't a sign that things are becoming seismically active, though, because the fact that they've had multiple small quakes like the one today in a rapid time span, like just the last few weeks, that is a bit unusual, like for the area. So hopefully it's not becoming, active like that.
oh, also, by the way, Matthew, you completely forgot the Yellowstone caldera, which could go off in between right now and 10,000 years from now, and nobody knows when.
Oh, how bad would that affect us from that distance?
Let me go pull that up. I think we're in like the zone of death. Like if it happens, we're all instantly dead. Let's see.
How you instantly dead? You just like get shook too much or something?
They push in on like like I don't really know. Let me go see if I can. Here we go. So this would be the ash thickness in millimeters. Around the Yellowstone area, the ash fall would be a meter thick. So around where we're at, it would be about a foot thick. About.
Nah, it wouldn't be that bad.
It wouldn't be that bad until all agriculture in America collapsed, because it's literally covering all of the farm fields that we use in ash that's a foot thick, Like,
these Salt Lake Cityans hadn't seen nothing yet. I'm from Alabama. A little foot of ash ain't gonna hurt nothing.
You just wait in Birmingham. The steel.
He's got soft hands out here in Salt Lake City. You ain't never felt some ash from the iron mills in the mine?
Back in Birmingham, when we weren't dealing with a bunch of weak-ass pansies, they just pour a foot of ash on everyone just to tell them to F off. That's what they do in Birmingham.
I used to bathe in ash.
Back in the day in Birmingham, I used to go and sell ash. I'd eat that shit, turn it into bread. I was real hard mother effer. God dang.
Yeah, my truck used to exhaust some ash out the back. It was a hell raiser.
We used to call that rolling coal. Yeah, man.
Oh man.
Oh boy.
Oh man, I gotta tell you though, living in Salt Lake City is really something else though. It really is cool. Like outside of the little earthquake tremor things that I haven't ever felt yet. And also the inversions that happen in the winter. Salt Lake City is a really cool place. It's like I was telling Matthew before we got on air. I was like, yeah, you know what's crazy about Salt Lake is that we're like basically in the middle of nowhere. There's no one else nearby for hundreds of miles, unless if it's Boise, Las Vegas, or Denver, really. And also what's kind of weird about that is that you really never leave the city once you're here, because the city has absolutely everything and anything that you could ever want to do or need within it. And it's not like any other city, like say in the South, because in the South, if you lived in Birmingham, and just kind of tell y'all where we were at back then, we were kind of like down near the Meadowbrook area of Birmingham. You would basically have to drive an endless amount of distance everywhere across the city just to get to one type of a store, because not every single part of the city would have that specific type of a store in it or anything like that. Like if you wanted to get to a bakery from Meadowbrook, you would have to drive like all the way down to like the Summit, which doesn't seem like it's that long of a distance until you factor in 280 is a death zone, and then that's a really long distance, and also it's like gridlocked all day. So you know that would be hell. And then. Hmm?
Well, also, by the way, when you get done with that, I thought of something else about the earthquake. I wanted to ask people that are familiar with it.
And then also the other thing with Birmingham is that a lot of parts of the cities were basically no-go areas. And honestly, I haven't really run into anything like that out here in Salt Lake City. Like the worst I've ever seen is maybe like West Valley, like near to the well, that's not even really that bad. I would honestly say the worst place that I've ever seen was kind of like Midvale. But even then, that's not really that bad. I mean, like Midvale is like an Alabama, like decent area. It's not like too bad. It's just kind of not the greatest. And Salt Lake City will really spoil you as far as what looks good and what doesn't. But what were you about to say, Matthew?
I was about to say, for the people that's experienced an earthquake before, because everybody out here panicked, and I was reading all the different reactions to the earthquake after it happened, the small one out here. I heard the people, like, they were right at the epicenter. But also, by the way, the epicenter was in West Valley City. It was, like, right there near Magna, and West Valley City was where the epicenter was. So around that spot where the earthquake originated from, people swore that they heard helicopters over their house. Like, everybody around that area was swearing. They said, there's helicopters flying over my house, and they were so loud, and you could hear the chopper over the roof, and then the house shook. Like, people swore that they heard a helicopter. Like, is that something that the people always report in an earthquake? Because that was incredible to me, that people not only felt the shaking, but they literally were convinced. Like, I saw like at least 20 or 30 reports of people being convinced about that.
Man, honestly, man, I think that might have been like the soil or the rocks or like the plate kind of like shifting around. I think that's what the noise was. But it's honestly, earthquakes or something else. It's really interesting. I would say though, folks, just being straight up, I would rather deal with the chance of having like a major earthquake happen maybe every 100 years or so, because the chances of that happening in your lifetime are fairly slim. Most people don't live to be 100, versus living in Alabama in Tornado Alley, where it's like living in the Blitz in World War II every single autumn that comes around, because the tornadoes come rolling through Alabama like a gentle rain. Like it affects every part of the state. You basically live in fear whenever a thunderstorm comes through that sounds as though there's a tornado warning possibly within it. And what's the best thing though is that Mississippi always got it before we did. So you'd always hear, man, they're getting ripped up in Mississippi, and then you'd be like, oh no, you'd be like, it's a day away, man. And then like that's when you get the video game objective like on the screen, where it's like objective survive, and it has the countdown of 1 day, and then you go and try and find a place in your house to hide and all that, and you don't get any
I
sleep.
don't miss that.
Yeah, you don't get any sleep those nights either, because you're basically just watching the news, waiting for someone to say, a tornado warning has been issued in your area. The Shelby County area is now under a tornado warning. You're like, oh! And then you'd be like trying to run and hide somewhere. And then most of the buildings in the South are built like shit, and they basically have nothing that will hold up in a tornado. So basically the whole house gets ripped away with you in it if it hits you.
And the tornadoes in the South, like it was a very morbid. It wasn't really a joke, because it was actually reality. It was kind of morbid. Every time there was a massive tornado, it always went for the trailer park. Like that was the unfortunate thing every time. Like, and also like when we moved into our little temporary spot before we moved out here to Utah, that place was built kind of like a trailer a little bit. It wasn't built that sturdy, so we were always horrified, thinking that a massive mega tornado was going to come through and just wipe the hell out of our place that we were living at. There was no base basement, we were just sitting ducks. Like if a tornado came through, like we were finished because that stuff was made out of like cardboard that place was made out of. But it always went for the trailer park every damn time. It always would. Everybody would be like, "Oh my God, no way!" It would literally go straight for it. And unfortunately, it would always be a disaster because it hit that. It was awful.
You know what's even crazier though, folks, is that Enforcer HQ 2.0 was built so shoddily that whenever a thunderstorm would come through and there was like kind of like stronger winds, which to be entirely honest with y'all are nowhere close to the winds that we get in Salt Lake, but they were still kind of strong. The house would literally creak and moan and like groan like it was about to get ripped apart just by the winds and the thunderstorm. We were basically living in like a cracker box almost, like with the structural integrity of that thing. And so we were always like, damn, even if like an F3 comes through this thing, we're getting ripped. Like this whole place is getting ripped apart. But also, like Matthew was right there. It is funny with tornadoes not funny in a funny way, but funny in a morbid way. How they would go for trailer parks because no joke, folks, it would be like, oh, it's getting really close to a trailer park, and it would be getting towards Birmingham. They'd be like, oh, thank God it missed a trailer park. Wait a minute, it's going southwest, and then it'd go and like slam right into the trailer park after it missed it. It would do stuff like that.
It was like a homing missile. Like it would literally be going like straight in a straight line. Like a tornado would be going in a straight line, one direction. Everybody's like, oh, it's a very predictable path. This thing's going northwest or something. It would be going northwest the entire track. Then all of a sudden it's like it sniffed out the trailer park that they would like swing like a 90-degree turn and go straight for it. And everybody like, oh my God. And unfortunately there was hardly any warning either because it would make such an abrupt turn and go for the trailer parks. Like there was no time for anybody to get any warning.
Yeah, I mean it's really nuts. You know, actually, there's a theory out there that something about trailer parks actually attracts tornadoes towards them. Like there's an actual theory out there, I think, like in the meteorological community, that it creates some sort of a weather element that actually starts to pull the tornadoes toward them. I don't know what it is about that. Like at least if they're in close enough range, it basically veers the tornado right towards itself. But I've heard that people are trying to look into that because apparently it is something that everyone has observed as like a humongous phenomenon. Is that if there ever is a trailer park anywhere in the state, the tornado will hit that place guaranteed, no doubt about it. You don't even have to question it. Like if you see that there's a trailer park anywhere in the path of that tornado and where it's going, you're like, it's guaranteed hitting that trailer park. No question. But anyways, one thing that is great though.
remember though, I remember we were still in the house with our parents. Like this was a very long time ago. We were still in the house with our parents. And I remember a tornado came along the way. Like I think that's when actually it hit a trailer park, unfortunately. And then it started coming for us because it wasn't finished yet. So it was going to try to come take us out next. So we literally like stood outside. I remember it distinctly. It got cold and it was hot because it was in the summer. It got cold out of the blue, and I was like, that's not good. That doesn't feel right. And then you could hear the huge, like, bust noise in the distance. And the tornado is literally, like, passing by right off to the left, right there off the valley. Like, there's a mountain and a valley next to the house. Thing was literally going right by. I was like, oh, there goes a son of a bitch right there. It literally went straight by, went straight out, like, into the woods, and then it cleared out another trailer park after that.
Man, you know what was even crazier about that tornado is that I remember standing out there and you could hear it. It was like a freight train. Like it actually sounded like a freight train moving down the rails. And then the lightning flashed and we actually saw the funnel of that thing. And it was only about a mile away at that point, I think.
Yeah, it was very close. And it's weird. It got like you could feel the pressure drop, like when that thing got near, like you could actually feel it. And also it got really cold, like out of the blue, like it got really chill. And it was like 70 or 80 degrees outside. And it felt like it turned like 40. And it felt like the pressure dropped instantly. It was a weird feeling.
Yeah, and then we all had to go running and hiding and hoping that it wasn't going to obliterate the place. But you know, and another thing is that back when we lived in our original hometown of Wetumpka, there was an F3 tornado that came through there, and it literally ripped the town in half. Like no joke, it went right down the middle of it, and it destroyed. Let me see if I can show y'all here what it looked like. Maybe I can even show y'all like an image from. Oh, look, they blurred out like the area near the Methodist church. This is the new Methodist church. This thing actually got ripped into pieces by that tornado back then. Let me see if I can show y'all that. Actually, they don't have anything from that time of the tornado in 2019, but I can kind of show you what it looked like before. This is what the area looked like before the tornado. This is what it looked like after the tornado.
Honestly, it kind of got improved.
I don't know. Actually, I think it kind of got a little bit worse because... Like, if you look at it here, Oh, wait a minute. This was right. There we go. You can see the church actually was destroyed right here.
Yeah.
You actually
Yeah,
see
right
it
there.
all.
I remember going and cleaning that up after it hit. Like literally, like in a few hours after it hit, I remember going to help clean that up.
Yeah, we actually helped out with that a lot. We actually, funnily enough, that was my first in-camera cameo on anything because I actually showed up behind the governor for like 10 seconds. It was like a Forrest Gump clip. When they were coming through the town, I was in the background for like 10 seconds out of the blue. I didn't even know. And like it was funny because I was like, oh my God, look, I'm on the news. Also, but anyways, though, let me get you all to what it looked like before. Wait a minute, where did those houses go? Oh, this is from 2009. Okay. Well, there were a lot more houses here back in 2009. I think they condemned all these and tore them down, if I'm not mistaken, like sometime before the tornado. But let me get you all back up here. This is what the place kind of looked like before, like when we were really young kids and we were like first going to school up here and everything. And this is what it looks like now. So there's no houses back there. There's nothing over there. I think they're trying to rebuild some stuff, but hardly. These stores were completely ripped up. Everything over here was ripped up and destroyed. And this church was also completely destroyed and had to be rebuilt from the ground up, basically. And everything was destroyed. Like, the tornado crossed the river right here. And then there was this giant swath of trees and everything that just ripped to pieces through this area, too. It was crazy. But I had...
You know what's insane? Go put it back down next to that bridge, right near that church right there. Go put it down right over there on that side. This road right here that you're looking at, this bridge, literally crosses every single day of our lives from grades 1 through 12. This is the route to school when we were kids. This is the one of the only ways you can get across the river, actually. There was one more bridge down the road to the left, about a few miles down the way. But this was literally the commute when we were young children until, obviously we graduated high school and then moved on to college. This was it right here.
Yeah, this was it. I remember that. Every single morning, folks, we would take the ride on this bridge, and, there would be all the shenanigans going on the bus, people spitting in each other's faces, humping the bus seats, the normal stuff that, kids going to school in Alabama would do, cussing each other out, beating each other up, all that stuff. And we would be crossing this bridge every day on the way to school and on the way back home. And what's funny about this, folks, is that it's actually believed nowadays that this bridge might be losing its structural integrity for a good amount of reasons. So eventually they might get rid of this bridge or it might collapse from what I heard last. But yeah, this brings back memories. Y'all want to see what the town actually looked like before we moved out of here? This is what it looks like now, and they kind of turned it into like a Mayberry movie set. But back when we were going to school, this is what it looked like.
Yeah, it looked a lot more dumpy than before they fixed it up. They had to fix it up right as we left. Like we lived here for years and years and years and years, and it looked like this, which wasn't that great. And then once we left, they immediately fixed it up.
Oh, also I saw a lore guy say the kids were humping the bus seats. Yeah, that's a story. Like I'll tell you like a little bit about that, but not a lot. Like there was this kid that we had on our bus that would get on there every day like the rest of us. And he would do this weird thing where he'd like hop on the seat and he'd just start humping it and he'd stare down someone on the bus while he was doing it. And this would absolutely jar us all every time it would happen, which was daily. And we always be like, this guy's got issues, like very bad mental issues. I remember, Matthew, the bus driver looked at me and went, hey, like, sit down. Like, it's like, stop that. I mean, like, I just got to say, folks, the people that we went to school with were, I'm just going to be completely frank, the majority of them were a very seedy bunch of people, like, and they didn't really grow up to be that good of people either, really.
Man, the kid that was humping the bus seat turned out to be a gangster. Oh, when he got older, by the way. He turned out to be a gangster. He takes pictures with all kinds of, let's say, hardware and things like that on street corners and stuff. So, I mean, he didn't go anywhere.
His dog though was cool. They had this German Shepherd called Dominic, and he basically like lived at our house as like a stay-in dog basically most of our lives. But yeah, that was a cool dog. But the kid though, I mean, some real issues there.
Oh man,
I mean, he was basically in training for the vice presidency. Huh?
That didn't happen at y'all's schools?
Apparently it didn't. Apparently, Matthew, a lot of our stories from school are absolutely shocking to a lot of people. And I think a lot of people don't get that. Like, I don't think that we come across as people who grew up in a place that was absolutely messed up in every degree, no matter what, no matter where we went, because we kind of came out fairly okay, at least as far as the public is concerned, out of the whole deal. But we grew up in an absolutely bizarro place. Also, let me show y'all. Here it is in 2008. Oh man.
Man, I got another little mini story, some mini lore, real quick. Honestly, a lot of atrocious things happened on the school bus rides. That was where a lot of atrocious things happened, but it got worse in the school, like it actually did. But one thing I can recall off the bat, I remember, and I would get on the school bus, I would tend my own business because I didn't want any trouble. So I just got on there and sat down and was just like, I observed the crazy stuff going on every single time I got on the thing. I remember there was this sister and two brothers that would be on the back of the school bus every day. They're always acting like fools back there, yelling, screaming, and getting in fights all the time. I remember the sister had gotten in a fight with one of the brothers, and she got out some hand sanitizer, put it on their hands, and then she flicked the hand sanitizer into her brother's eyes. I think intentionally. All you could hear from the back of the bus was, "My eyes, my eyes!" And I saw this kid jump up. His eyes were solid red. And I was like, what the hell just happened back here? I was like, what's this kid? Is he crazy? So then he got up, and it just so happened that one of the younger children at the front of the bus had just thrown up in the aisle. So, wait a second. So the brother, in his fit of like absolute delirium, because he had this hand sanitizer in his eyes, went running to the front of the bus for help, tripped and fell in the vomit. And they're in the front of the bus. When that happened, the entire bus stopped and went silent, and all you heard was, "Oh my God." I was like, what the hell? I literally looked, turned left out the window, and I did not take my eyes off the road after that happened. I literally sat there, turned up the music as loud as I could in my headphones, looked out the window, and never looked back. Bro. And then I got a whiff of that smell, and I was like, oh my God, get me off this bus.
Bro, hold up, man. You're forgetting a lot of this story, man. I gotta get the real details out. Like, there's a couple of details that you've missed here. So earlier on in the bus ride, because I'll actually tell you the schools we went to because it's Wetumpka. It's not like they have different ones. We went to Wetumpka Elementary, Middle, and High. They're basically all in this area of town. So at this point in time, me and Matthew were going to Wetumpka Middle School, this one right here. And how this would work is that in the mornings, they would drive the bus first to the elementary school. Then they would take a turn down this road and they'd shoot over to the high school and they'd drop the kids off here. Then they would drive to the middle school. And the middle school was the last location that kids would be. Well, actually, no. Actually, sorry. That was like our last years at school. This time around, back then, I think it was the middle school that would get their kids dropped off first because they would come down this highway, the State Route 14, and then they drop them all at the middle school, drop them off at the elementary, and then the high school kids were the last ones to be dropped off. So when we were driving up to the middle school, we were on this bridge street and we took this turn right here. And this kid, he was like 3 rows in front of Matthew and me. He just went, he just threw up in the middle of the aisle. It's like, you know, it was like orange and chunky. It was just nasty.
Oh,
and
no,
it
don't
reeked.
describe it.
And so everyone went, and then the bus driver, I'm not going to say his name, but the bus driver was an absolute G. He was like, hey, keep it down back there. And so we were driving up to the middle school and everyone's like, oh my God, let me off. And then those people in the back were messing around and we pulled up right here. We went past this area right here and then we turned in right here to the left and then started coming up to the door. Remember, Anthony, we were like in the line of buses waiting to get to the main entrance here to get dropped off. And then that's when that girl flung the Germex into that kid's eyes. And then that kid said, oh my God, my eyes. And we turned around and the dude literally did a flying leap through the bus. When I turned around, he was mid-flight. Remember, Matthew? His knees were like jacked up into his chest. He was literally flying through the air. And he landed, folks, his legs extended, face first onto the floor, his head slammed right into the vomit, and his hands are covering his eyes, and he's rolling around the floor. He doesn't even know he's rolling in vomit yet. He's just yelling, my eyes! Oh, my eyes! And everyone went, oh my God! And the bus driver said, hey! And so he's trying to get
I think the bus driver was even in shock. I remember he yelled, "Hey!" And then he went silent after that and didn't say anything. I was like, I think he was even baffled.
Bro, and then at that moment in time when the kid's rolling his head in the vomit, our bus finally is its turn to get dropped off the kids at the front door. So then we have to like basically like hold on to the two seats. You remember, man? They kind of like vault over him to get to the door to get out of the bus.
Oh my
Oh
God.
my God. It was
Yeah, it was a lot
crazy.
of crazy stuff happening. And also, there were some really sketchy folks that rode the bus too that were like, I don't know if they were in a gang or what, but they were like serious, like they were into something bad after school. Like it was clear that they were up to something. I remember there was a horrid, like a really bad fight. I thought somebody was actually about to get killed back there. There was this one guy that was like a gangster fella. I think he actually was legit in a gang. And there was like this wannabe gangster kid. And I was like, oh, damn. This wannabe gangster kid's about to get his ass handed to him really bad. And it turns out he went and picked a fight with this real gangster in the back of the bus. And it proceeded to be almost a murder back there. It was very, very bad. It was so bad that I think this was before. I don't know if Andrew was on the bus, but I think they had to call the cops. It was so bad. And once we got to the school, they had the cops waiting there for this whole situation. It was that bad. I mean, one kid got so jacked up. I was like, dang. I was like, I'm not sure if I've ever seen anybody this jacked up from a fight. It was pretty serious. It was honest. It was like a Thunderdome, like in the school we were going to. Like no exaggeration. It was a Thunderdome. I don't think we realized how bad it was until we told some people that did not go to our school area what was going on. And then they were like, what the hell? Like, what kind of school are y'all going to? I was like, well, I thought that was just the run-of-the-mill environment, but apparently it's not.
Yeah, we were just like, oh, and also another thing is just that no matter what, whenever we would try and tell anyone, i.e., basically our parents, about what was going on, they just, whatever, they wouldn't really care too much. So we always thought that it was just kind of normal because really anyone we would ever tell these stories to, basically, they really didn't give a shit. And then when we grew up and we started telling people who didn't grow up in that what was going on and they actually cared to listen, then everyone was like, oh my God, what the hell were you all in? And it was like, well, basically prison. Like, like that's what we equate school to. It was almost like going to prison every day because the kids in there were basically like convict minded. And to be entirely honest with you, a lot of them end up becoming convicts. Like a lot of them I know are like on parole or they're in jail or something. It's like not a lot of them went far. I mean, they went right out the school doors and right into the prison doors. Most of them did.
Yeah, I knew this would be the last story I tell about it. I'm rabbit holing like crazy on this, but I knew a kid that I went to school with, to high school with. I was familiar with him. I kind of was like generally friendly with him in prior years and stuff like that. But he went really sideways, like in high school, so I had to get away from him. He left school one day, got in his car with his friends, went down to a neighborhood down the way, and found this kid he was having a problem with. He proceeded to shoot the kid in the head, then run him over with his car, and then went home. It turned into an attempted murder case. The kid survived, by the way. They got shot. And it was all over a female, the whole thing was. So, I mean, this was how, pretty crazy it got. Like, it was like people were leaving school and people were getting shot after school and stuff like that. Like, it was actually that pretty rough. So, I mean, that was one time. There was some other stuff that happened too.
Dude, man, I remember, like, here's a couple of them to just throw them off the top of my head. There was this kid that I think we kind of knew. I didn't really know him. I'm not really sure. I kind of just heard of the kid's name before, kind of. But I think this happened in high school. But the kid got arrested on a double homicide because the cops had come by this kid's house and his dad was outside, and he basically told this load of malarkey to the cops about his kid was being really violent and trying to access the guns. And then a couple of hours later, the cops come back and both the parents are dead and the kid's alive. So he got arrested on a double homicide. Well, it turns out that the kid didn't do anything. It was actually his dad that took out his mom and then took himself out. And the kid basically got his whole entire reputation and life smeared at the start because the cops really didn't do a lot of investigating before they arrested him on a double homicide. And then there was this another thing that happened down in this place called Redland, which is down here, which is basically kind of like Wetumpka, but not really. But this guy wiped out his whole family. Like, I think it was like he had like 3 kids and a wife, and he wiped out 2 of his kids and his wife just in one afternoon. And I think those kids, I didn't know them, but I think one of them was going to the high school when that happened, if I'm not mistaken, right, Matthew?
I really don't recall.
It was, honestly, it was a very violent place. Like it really was. But anyways, with that, folks, It's time for us to move on. Enough of all these dark stories of our lives when we were growing up. I mean, kind of crazy stuff to talk about because a lot of people, they didn't really hear about this stuff. And then there was a million crazy stories. We could tell you all endless crazy stories of just going to school, and dealing with that. And it's kind of crazy. We came out of that, folks, and then we ended up creating a successful show. We didn't end up becoming a part of the show on the local news. But anyways, with that, it's time for us to move on and into the next one.
All right, so our next one goes to none other than Marion Deemer, and thank you very much, Marion, for that $30 support, and we do appreciate that very, very much. And Marion said, please tell your viewers that the U.S. has stopped all aid to Ukraine.
Thank you for the support, Marion Deemer, and that is largely true. The U.S. has effectively stopped all aid to Ukraine, except for $800 million over the next 2 calendar years, which is $400 million a year, which in military terms is a non-existent amount of funding. So that is absolutely true. We generally have stopped most, if not all, funding to Ukraine, which I think is an absolute mistake. But a huge thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep it running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running, and we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. So humongous thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to My Trucking Travels, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, My Trucking Travels, for that support once again. He said, just your friendly overnight truck driver again. And yes, I run that southern route, Phoenix back to Houston tonight, LOL. LSA forever, and take one from the chat.
Wow, that's interesting. I wonder what the interstate looks like down there in, like, New Mexico. What does it look like down here? Oh, wow. This is the desert, basically. This is a chaparral, technically.
This is like the 5 Mile Pass that I like to go out to a lot.
Man, this is like that place that Buster Scruggs was singing that all day I face the barren waste without a taste of water. Like, this is like what you think of when you think of Wild West. You think of a place like this. Really cool though. I mean, that's really neat to hear that you drive that route from Phoenix, and tonight you're going back to Houston. That's actually a long route. I mean, how far is that? Like, as far as a straight line goes, over 1,000 miles. Dang! We did 2,000 miles from Birmingham to Salt Lake to move out here, and that was hell because I was in a Penske truck. I hope it's more comfortable for you in an actual 18-wheeler. I've always heard that it is, and I hope so, because I would never wish anyone driving a Penske 2,000 miles. I would never wish that upon a soul, because it was hell and torture. And I'll never go that far to move again in a Penske. Like, the farthest that I'm moving, folks, next time I move, if we ever move out of Salt Lake City, which I highly doubt, will be to a place like Boise or Denver. But I'm not going anywhere that's over 1,000 miles in a Penske. That would be unrealistic. That was insane that we even did that. But anyways, a big thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep it running, Trucking Chef. And I gotta say, it's a wonderful thing to know that you're here with us tonight, and I hope that we're keeping you company while you're driving that long old Interstate 10. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to none other than Pleasure Burn, who puts in a $20 support. And thank you very much, Pleasure Burn, for once again supporting the channel and helping to keep it running. And also a big shout out to Larry Champagne for putting in a 20 as well. And we appreciate the both of you, Pleasure Burn and Larry, for helping to keep the channel running. And Enforcer, what say you?
I gotta thank y'all both, Pleasure Burn and Larry, for the support and helping the channel to keep on running. You didn't throw in comments, but we're still greatly appreciative, and we thank y'all massively for enjoying this channel and helping us to keep this thing rolling time and time again. So huge thanks to y'all so much once again, and with that, it is time for us to move on to the next one.
And we also have 3 super chats from Gunfox. And thank you very much, Gunfox, once again for that support. And he has some more space history in these super chats.
Oh.
He said that the TS-50, the U.S. Microgravity Laboratory, was a NASA space shuttle mission, the 12th mission of the Columbia Orbiter, and Columbia landed at Kennedy Space Center for the first time ever due to bad weather at Edwards Air Force Base.
Interesting. That's very cool to hear. And I gotta say that this little microgravity thing here, that's very interesting right there. Look at that. That's really cool. This was actually apparently a joint venture with the European Space Agency. That's really neat. Look, the Europeans are helping us out with space exploration. But a huge thanks to you so much for the support and sharing that with us. That is a very interesting thing to learn about and to know. And I got to thank you greatly for helping this channel to keep it running and sharing with us facts about space exploration, because we're always interested in knowing a little bit about that space. Also, that looks like the Bahamas down there, kind of. Like, that looks like the larger island in the Bahamas. Is that? Yeah, it's this one. It's this big one right here. See, it's the same one.
Yeah, I think it is, actually.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is, I says. But a huge thanks to you for the support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to your next one. What do we got, Matthew? What do we got?
And Gunfox's second super chat says 1633, the Galileo Galilei arrives in Rome to stand trial for advocating that the earth revolves around the sun, a criminal heresy to the Roman Catholic Inquisition. Galileo will be found vehemently suspect of heresy. Question from the chat.
And that's actually something very interesting right there, Gunfox 61, and a reason why having a religious theology running your government isn't a good thing, case in point. Back in the day, folks, the belief is that the universe was Earth-centric. Instead of solar-centric. Basically, those are the words I'm going to use for it. There's a more technical term for both. But the idea up until that point was that everything revolved around the Earth. And the reasoning behind that was because God created the earth, therefore human creation is supreme. So for that reason, everything else revolves around it. So according to that sort of a model, the earth was stationary, and the sun, the moon, and all of the stars, planets, and everything else, they revolved every day around the earth in a 24-hour cyclical cycle. Galileo actually proved through astronomical observations that that was not the case, and it was actually the fact that the sun was more so stationary than the earth, and the Earth actually circled the sun, and the moon then circled the Earth. That was actually viewed, crazily enough, although there really isn't any, I believe, specific mention in the Bible at that time about that being the case. It was actually believed and stated as heresy, and Galileo was actually found highly suspect of heresy, much like Gunfox 61 said, which was basically a severe crime at that time. Nowadays, everybody knows that the Earth does orbit around the sun, and everybody also knows that the sun also orbits around a larger cluster of stars off in the distance, and that everything in the universe is actively in motion. And we really don't know where the center of the universe is, but it's not here. And that's something that's a little bit interesting about that sort of stuff, is because whenever you see a religious theocracy take power, the rhetoric more so beats facts. And I'm also not saying that as in religion is a bad thing, but I am saying that it's a bad thing for a religion to be in charge of running the government, and everything has to revolve around the religious theology, because that doesn't have to do with Christianity. You can look at the Islamic Republic of Iran and see that no matter what type of religion, you end up with fairly similar results, and it's just not really a good thing. So I do thank you massively for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I got to say, that is a very interesting piece of history, and one that I have to say is a fairly important one to once again remind folks that separation of church and state, where the state doesn't get involved in religious affairs, is actually more so beneficial than it is detrimental to the benefit and advancement of society. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And to grab that question from the chat while we're at it. Also, by the way, Gunfox says I didn't grab a question from his super chats last night, so I'll grab two tonight to make up for that. And his first one here goes to IC, who said, do y'all think these explosions in Iran are Delta Force and Sayarat Maktal?
I would say it's most likely the CIA and the Mossad, but highly likely leaning into the Mossad that is doing this inside of Iran. Because the U.S. is trying to negotiate right now. They might try and do a little bit of this, but the Israelis are the ones more so gung-ho to start bombing Iran again, so they're probably the ones doing all of the pre-preparation work that they can by getting the Mossad to go out there and do it for them. So that's generally what I'm believing right now. So I hope that does address that the best that I can. And with that, we're going to get the second live chat question in honor of Gunfox 61.
And this one goes to Kim, who said, did you hear about the EU approving a $100 billion loan to Ukraine to be repaid from reparations by Russia after the war?
Yes, actually, we did hear about that. I think that was a little while ago, if I'm not mistaken. But it was a very good thing to hear, and it does assure that Ukraine will be getting support on into the future, which is a very good thing. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, and a big thanks to you once again for helping this channel to keep on running. And also, I just saw someone say that Christians founded the U.S. government, which is not entirely true. There were actually agnostics that were a part of the founding of the U.S. government as well. And on top of that, another thing is that really simplifies things. And I find that so interesting, folks, how the modern religious argument has been simplified and boiled on down to where it doesn't really reflect any historical arguments about religion. Because a Christian is not a Christian at all, historically. A Christian falls within many different Protestant groups, or they're a Catholic. And generally, in most of U.S. history, Catholics were looked at pretty poorly. And only recently, once Catholics started to make up a larger percentage of the Christian population in America, are they considered to be full-on Christians like the rest. Protestants used to absolutely hate Catholics in this country. And outside of that, almost every other Protestant group disliked other Protestant groups because they would disagree on theological points, which I always find so interesting today is that people say Christians founded the country, but what they forget is that it wasn't Christians, it was Quakers, it was Puritans, it was Baptists, it was Anabaptists, it was basically every Protestant group that you could imagine that existed in Europe that founded this country over here, which as far as they were concerned during that time, and as far as anyone would be concerned in the modern day that isn't trying to make some sort of a Christian nationalist argument, those might as well be completely different religions because they never agree on specific ideological points as it concerns with Christianity. And on top of that, people like Benjamin Franklin and others hardly even believed in a Christian God, and they just stated that there was some sort of a creator out there, but it wasn't the God that was in the Bible. It was something else, which was a very heavy prevailing idea at the time, and that's also why the Great Awakening, which happened right afterwards, and during that time, was a really big deal, because back then, people were generally kind of slipping out of, I guess you could say the general ebb and flow of being heavily Christian. That's why the Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening are very big theological points in U.S. history, because before those points, those Great Awakenings, the U.S. was largely distancing itself away from Christianity or any religion for that matter. So it's a little bit hard, and also, I mean, like saying, I said Christians, but this is too many to mention, but you're saying that, though, as in, like, Christians found the country, so obviously it should be Christian. But Christians found the country, and they clearly made it to where it isn't a Christian country, and it's a country that has a lot of Christians in it, but Christianity isn't a guiding theological pursuit of the government, which is the way it should be and the way it should be maintained. I don't really like the idea of people in the government getting involved in the nitty-gritty of my religious beliefs and telling me what makes me a Christian and what doesn't make me a Christian, just to be entirely frank. If you watch the government mismanage everything else, why the hell would you ever think that they should be involved in telling us anything about religion? I mean, you know, like we're gonna have people who might be incriminated in what happened down on the island telling us what's religious and not, and what's Christian and what's not. I mean, like, if I was to ever be told what in the world was who in the world is a Christian and who isn't, I'm sure as hell not going to be told that by a politician. I'll just be completely frank, and I don't really think they have a right to tell anyone else what qualifies as a religion or not, considering generally how morally destitute most of them are in Washington. But anyways, with that, it is time for us to move on to the next one.
All right, and also if we keep up a good pace, we might be able to get some more live chats tonight, possibly. So just something to keep in mind. But jumping into our next one here, this one goes to Gunfox, who puts in a $20 support. And thank you very much, Gunfox, for the third support. He said in 1970, Jarbois Blue has exploded in the Algerian Sahara Desert at 70 kilotons, is the largest atomic weapon test seen yet. And the French now have the bomb, along with the U.S., the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom.
And I got to thank you so much for your support in sharing that interesting little bit of information with us. And I got to say, it's always interesting, nuclear history. And it's something that's actually a little bit misunderstood, at least in the modern understanding, about how much development was made in the progress of nuclear science over the past few decades. But a huge thanks to you for the support. I hope that I addressed that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a $20 support from Arar983. And thank you very much, Arar, for that $20 support as well. And Arar said, second segment fund, and LSA has all the cards.
And thank you so much for the support, and thank you for the special segment fund.
And we always have the cards. We have lots of cards. And I gotta thank you massively for the support and helping this channel to keep running.
And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have an $11 support from M. Puffer. And thank you very much for the support as well. They said, look up the history of St. Valentine and Valentine's card actual. And you guys rock in LLT, LSA.
And let me go pull up St. Valentine. Ah, here he is. He was he was early on, a 3rd century Roman saint. I actually got to be honest with y'all. I know the story of St. Valentine a little bit about how he was imprisoned and he would let out the Valentine's cards, I think, from the window of his cell. But I don't really know the story intricately. But he was born in Terni, in Italia, in the Roman Empire, and he died in Rome, aged 42 to 43, possibly. They actually didn't really concern themselves with birth dates back then.
He must have had some stocks in the candy industry or something to start that holiday.
Man, he said, "You see, people, they don't know what I'm doing now, but the Hershey's is going to thank me in 1,000 years or so." Like, he's like, believe me. But beyond that, I'd have to say, let's see here. Eastern, Western, let's see. 3rd century saint, commemorated in Western Christianity and in Eastern Orthodoxy on July 6th. From the High Middle Ages, his feast day has been associated with a tradition of courtly love. He's a patron saint of tourney, epilepsy, and beekeepers. Let's see, St. Valentine was a clergyman, either a priest or a bishop in the Roman Empire, who ministered to persecuted Christians. He was martyred, and his body was buried on the Via Flaminia on the 14th of February, which has also been observed as the Feast of St. Valentine since at least the 8th century. Let's see, and then it talks about his relics, because in the Catholic Church, they are very big into relics. Well, let's see here. St. commemorated, let's see, it's recognized in July. So, dang, they actually wrote a lot on this guy. Like, he has a lot of information on him.
Did he use Messenger Max?
No, like, he did not use Messenger Max. But
not endorsed by St. Valentine. It's not a loving thing to do to use Messenger Max. That's what you do if you want to find yourself in trouble.
Exactly, like, for sure. But also, I gotta say, you know, I always find it interesting how the patron saints, there's like a patron saint of everything in the Catholic Church, and it's like this is an interesting mix of things to be a patron saint of. The patron saint of Terni, which is a city in Umbria in central Italy, and then to be the patron saint of epilepsy and beekeepers, which seem to be all very detached things that he's the patron saint of combined. You know, it's like it's quite interesting to me how that works. Not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it's interesting though. But I do thank you so much for the support, and I hope that this was about the best look that we could give in the St. Valentine's on a quick glance. I will say though that this painting of him is pretty cool looking. I really do like that painting. But anyways, a big thanks to you so much once again, and with that, we are on and into the next one.
And we also have a 10 from Robert Krogan. And thank you very much, Robert, for that support as well. He said, good evening, enforcers and LSA, and a little something for the cause.
And thank you so much for something for the cause. You help us to be able to keep this cause rolling by keeping ourselves on air. And we got to thank you massively for supporting this channel and helping it to keep running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this channel running. So a big thanks to you once again. And we're on to the next one.
And we also have a 10 from Raphael Philippe. And thank you very much, Raphael, for that support. He said, as a Latin American, I would like to bring your attention to the rusty abandoned oil reservoirs around that refinery in Cuba. It's very typical.
Yeah, you know, I was noticing that, and that's what made me think it was not an oil refinery, because they had so many oil tanks. I was like, this was probably an oil storage facility, not a refinery. It just turns out the refinery is just this spot right here and nothing else. I bet you this could be run by like 20 men, probably. I mean, that's not even a big refinery. That's literally nothing. Like, if we go over and look at Russia, or hell, we could even look at like a place near Baton Rouge. I mean, this is what I think of as a refinery, a place like this. Like, this is a refinery to me. What they have down in Havana is like a artisan refinery. It like does small amounts of refining. But I do thank you so much for the support, and thank you for letting us know a little bit of that as a Latin American from the Latin part of America, which does not speak Latin. They just call them that. But a huge thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a $10 support from Mr. Jack, who puts in a 10. And thank you, Jack, for that support. He said, but Russia is apparently a friend of the United States now. Could the Department of War just be looking for easy wins as a way to bolster the peace through strength mantra?
I would say maybe, but highly unlikely. They like the whole thing about peace and war, it's all a sham currently by the current administration. Like, there's no actual pursuit of peace, and there's no like the whole peace deal is a sham deal. The real interest is just conducting any war that they can, so that way now they can say we ended 8 wars and we won 8, and this is the greatest thing that any president's ever done. No one's ever done this before. No one's ever won 8 wars and ended 8 of them in a single administration and all that. And people are just haters, and they don't want to say that all of this was stupid, and it's that whole deal. But a big thanks to you for the support and help with the channel to keep it running. And I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Sadata Hosoda. And thank you very much, Sadata, for that $10 support. They said, thank you.
And thank you so much for the support and help with this channel to keep on running. If it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. So big thanks to you once again. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a $10 support from Kyle Padella. And thank you very much, Kyle, also for that support. He said, the Oklahoma weather is absolutely crazy. I live south of Moore, Oklahoma, which was hit by an F5 tornado in 1999 and another F5 in 2013 at central Oklahoma.
I watched a documentary about that F5 that hit Moore, and I think if I remember right, the tornado was so strong that it left marks in the ground. It literally ripped the soil out of the ground. Let me see if I can show y'all that, like the ground scouring near Moore. Let me see if I can find a picture of that for y'all. Oh yeah, here's what was left of a car after that tornado.
Damn, that thing was like stripped down like thieves got a hold of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Detroit. I mean, look at this. That right there where that brown streak is, that's the soil being ripped out and basically sandblasted off of the ground from the force of that tornado.
That's crazy work right there.
Yeah, I mean, this was an absolutely insane tornado. Here's another one. Here's another picture of it.
Jeez. I feel that's how Iran's going to look.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, that's deep. Like, that's deep, bro. Like, it probably is going to look like that. But this was an absolutely horrendous tornado. One that was incredibly destructive. And I remember right, everyone was trying to leave the city because they thought it was going to be going right into Oklahoma City. So they were all backed up on Interstate 35. And then the tornado veered south into Moore and then basically hit the occupied interstate as well. So it was a nasty event back then. And I gotta say, the weather out there in Oklahoma is truly crazy. Funnily enough, there's Dixie Alley, which is the tornado alley of the southeast, and then there's actual Tornado Alley, which is in Oklahoma in that general area. But a huge thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And also a big shout out to X10 Man who puts in a 5. He said, great show, but it's an X air traffic control. RCH is reach and RRR is RAF, which is call sign Ascot.
And I thank you so much for supporting and sharing that with us. Sadly, I'm not an air traffic controller. One day I would like to be an air traffic controller, though. That would be pretty cool, I think that'd be a neat job, actually. I get a lot of respect for air traffic controllers. And maybe one day after this whole thing rounds out, if it ever does,
bro,
maybe...
There's somebody outside, man. Like, and somebody's about to say, I'm sick. Trust me, the fool that's outside doing this, they're no spy. Trust me. Some fool just did a drift, like out here, like down the way. I just literally heard screeching tires. That thing was going crazy. It sounded like a RX-8, sounded like a rotary engine. It was hell going on out here, man. You couldn't believe. I wish I'd got that on video.
Man, they was raising hell out there, I tell you. It was raising hell. But getting back to the air traffic controller thing, I would like to be an air traffic controller one day. If this whole thing rounds out, I might try and see about doing that, because I got a lot of respect for air traffic controllers, and it also seems like a very prestigious sort of a job, and also one that's incredibly important for the safety of the flying public. So a huge thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Marion Demerett yet again. And thank you very much, Marion, for that second support of the night. And Marion said, thank you guys, and you rock.
And thank you, Marion, and you rock. And I thank you, Master, for the support. And help with this channel to keep on rolling. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And also a big shout out to Robbie, who just put in a 5 as well. And thank you very much, Robbie, for that support. He said, Enforcer and Enforcer Matt, do you think the long game would be to get rid of the Cuban government and turn Cuba into the second semiconductor capital? The problem with that, Robbie, is it's a good idea because it is real estate. But the problem with that is you got to build all the power infrastructure and stuff for it. And right now, Cuba has no ability to support anything like that. So you got to build everything from the ground up. So, for example, if you're wanting to build like semiconductor manufacturing in the United States, you simply choose a place that has a pre-existing infrastructure. You slightly augment it with more systems and more power production, and then you generally are good to go. With Cuba, you're starting from scratch. So it'd be a lot of work. But Enforcer, what say you?
I actually had an idea for what Cuba could do to try and make some money. which is basically become an economic tax haven, and also try and be basically a cargo container storage facility or transportation hub, because it is in the middle of the Gulf. And there isn't really a lot of traffic in the Caribbean, but it might be able to position itself as an well, not really. When I think about it, it's not really like in a position like Hong Kong or Singapore where they do that. So that would even be hard for Cuba to do as well. And you also have to go and meander around the Bahamas, which is a bit of a thing. So, I mean, even that would be tough. So, I mean, they could try, but then again, you have to basically build everything from the ground up to get them to that point. I mean, one thing I was thinking about Cuba, maybe a way they can make money is that they could get big into what Mexico does, which is like furniture manufacturing and stuff like that. I mean, that doesn't take a lot to do. You know, it's a kind of a much lower investment than other sorts of industrial ventures, and that could start getting them a monetary base to work with for later and raise the quality of life in Cuba. But that still would be a pretty long route because they're literally starting from basically a clean slate with nothing down there, and they have to build their way up from there. But with that, I hope that does address that well, and a big thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
Also, Monster Lab said, Matt's apparently not a rotary engine fan, I take it. No, I don't mind a rotary engine. I don't mind those RX-8s. But the problem is, though, I just don't like them, you know, sliding by, you know, at basically midnight. Like, that's not good. I don't like it. But anyways, jumping into our next one here. This one goes to Laser, who puts in a 5. And they said, shock and awe 2.0 in Iran?
Maybe. We'll have to see. That might be a month from now, so we'll have to really wait and see. But a big thanks to you for the support. I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Jacob, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, Jacob, for that support. He said, when should I buy oil? And I'd recommend probably before Puff gets out of prison. But Enforcer, what say you?
yo, like, man, I would say the best time to buy oil is whenever your car is running low on it. That's what I'd say. But a big thanks to you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Robert Planting, who puts in a 5. He said, I feel for the apolitical humans in Cuba. Send good vibes for those unrepresented.
I'd say vibes would be good, but right now I think a lot of them would be dying for a nice, good steak. Like, I think that's what a lot of them really want. I do thank you for the massive support, though, and helping the channel to keep running. But I would say, I really think what the Cubans would be dying for would be a new government that would allow for their country to have some opportunities and a chance at things. But we can't do that and also basically punish everyone in Cuba at the same time, truth be told. And that's kind of what we're doing right now. These people have it tough already. I mean, if we drop down on a street view in Havana again, you'll be able to see it clear as day. So let's go right here, say. Anyone living in a city that looks like it's still in the 18th century is going to be living it pretty rough. And these people have it rough as it is. They live a tough life their entire lives. And now we're going to completely cut out any electricity that they might have, and also any public transportation, which basically grinds the country to a complete stop, and it's going to make a bad situation already worse. So if we were to do anything, I think it should have been quick. It shouldn't be what we're doing right now, because we're basically worsening the suffering of the Cuban citizenry, which we shouldn't really be making our primary objective. But a big thanks to you for the support and helping the channel to keep it running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And we also have a 5 from MF. And thank you for that support. They said, do you think that the Olympics might be playing a part in a decision with the U.S.-Iran conflict?
Maybe. Honestly, the Olympics just aren't as big as they used to be anymore. So it might not. But I don't really think so, to be entirely honest. But I do thank you for the support and helping this channel to keep it running, and I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Jeremy Vahill, and Jeremy said, is it time for the North Korean video showing life in America?
Yes, it is. It's time to get it. We did promise that to y'all last night. So let me go get it. Let's see. North Korean life in America. Here we go. Oh man, it's great.
How Americans live today.
Oh man,
Thank you.
Rory off to a great start, man. Like,
Dramatic music. This is how Americans live today, drinking coffee made from snow and living in tents and buying guns to kill each other, especially children.
I like how they add in the especially part, you know? Like, it just wasn't good enough as it was.
Some people complain about the guns.
I don't like them.
Some people complain about the guns. And they make it sound like it's just like a complaint, like, gee, those guns. You know, it's like no like major debates. It's like, damn, those guns, I tell you.
Living on the streets of modern-day America.
Man, they had some dramatic ass music for like basically a homeless camp, man. Like they had a whole orchestra and everything.
Man, I hope that music ain't copyrighted or something.
Oh no, it's all good. Like it's North Korean. It's all good. They don't have copyright.
These trees are full of snow.
That I make coffee
You'll
from.
see that there are no birds. They've been eaten by the people who live in these tents and corridors.
Right, they said people who live in these tents, and they went to a hallway in a hardened structure, and then they said and corridors, man, to make it to try and make it make a little bit more sense.
This man awaits heroin.
Honestly, that's
He
like
awaits it like it's a delivery.
Bro, he awaits it like someone's going to push the needle in. It's like, hey, yo, hold up, man. It's like, it's not like that. This isn't like, you know, this is self-serve out here in America.
Their houses blow down very easily.
They forgot to mention
Like a nuke hit that one.
Bro, they forgot to mention it's like a category 5 hurricane, you know, it's not really like a weak one, you know, it's a pretty big one.
And they have to live in tents like these.
Like, well, bees don't live in tents.
Man, in North Korea, even the beehives are intense, bro. They're like, oh, it's so tough out here, man. Like,
Man will show us his tent with pride.
Show us the tent with pride. It's like, I think you just kind of walked in and asked him to show the tent, he's showing it. Doesn't mean he's showing them pride.
He points to his items, but the camera notices his roof.
The camera notices? You mean the cameraman clearly saw the giant gaping hole in what clearly isn't a tent because it's got a timber frame to it?
Yeah, how could you miss those pallets?
Bruh, they clearly noticed the giant hole in the roof. It's like,
fallen down. This is common in modern-day America.
honestly, if this video was released in 2026, it might actually be getting a little close to realistic, but this was released in like 2010, I think. This was like right after the Great Recession and everything, and even back then this was nowhere close to being true, but they got to make the North Korean citizens think that they don't have it that bad because America has it even worse. So if you're watching this video right now, by the way, folks, just know the North Koreans are maybe one step above this, and the only reason it's this exaggerated is because they have to make it sound worse than the average North Korean's quality of life.
The American Red Cross supplies curtains and walls from material from North Korea.
Because clearly North Korea wants to destroy America, but they're also going to provide the building and construction materials to the United States.
Again, there are no birds in the trees apart from these, which will be eaten on Tuesday.
Bro,
There it was.
They'll be eaten on Tuesday. Man, I gotta say, man, this video is a trip. Also, we gotta skip forward a little bit because I do want to make sure that we have time to get to some questions. I've got to find the part about the expensive Dell computers. Here we go.
Meantime, in the major offices, factories and railway stations, people sit around under expensive adverts for Dell computers.
Oh man, let me see. Where's the last part? Oh man. Let's see. Oh, here's the coffee made of snow. And also the great friends that are sitting next to body bags. Here's that part.
You can also eat the snow, of which there is plenty in the United States. These people lie huddled together with their dead friends in blue body bags, drinking coffee cups full of local snow.
That looks like Starbucks.
Bro, they had an obsession with coffee made of snow. Like for some reason, man, the North Koreans harp on that part. Apparently, that's unheard of in North Korea to have coffee made of snow. But I think it's more so unheard of in North Korea to have coffee, like at all. You know, like I feel like that's probably the more unheard of part. It's like coffee. What the hell's that? You know, like it's like nobody in North Korea has that stuff. But anyways, with that, I hope you enjoyed the video of the North Koreans drinking their coffee made of snow. And it's time for us, of course, folks, to move on and into the next one. But a big thanks to you once again for support and help this channel to keep on running.
Indeed. And our next one goes to Catherine Hooper, who puts in a 5. And Catherine said, "Hi, guys, and thanks for all the research. And do you have intel about the water situation in Iran, aid projections, and also not sure what info is getting out in LSA?"
Right now, the water situation is still bad inside of Iran. It is really rough at the moment, and we understand that it's not improving. That's really all that we know right now, but we don't really get a lot of in-depth detail because we only get details on that when the Iranians update their own people, and then we end up getting that out here in the Western world. So I hope that does address that the best I can, and a big thanks to you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And a big shout out to Big Ron, who threw in a 5. He said, "I suppose that we are North Korea's Temu."
Yes, we are North Korea's Temu, and that's why we like to have coffee made of snow and ship them all kinds of amazing goods, like curtains and walls, because clearly walls are item made in a factory and not made on a construction site out of raw materials. But a big thanks to you for the support and help the channel to keep running. And we're on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from LJ Jidus, who said, "Did you know that the Wasatch Front gets hurricane-force windstorms that damages houses and blows trees and fences over?"
Oh, yeah.
I actually know that. I actually almost got blown off a cliff like because of those winds. That was when we first got here a little earlier in the early months. I almost got blown right off a mountaintop. But yeah, it gets bad. I do know. Almost died. But Enforcer, what say you?
We all almost died up there. But beyond that, though, I have to say, yes, we do know of those winds. They're pretty rough. But I'll say that the winds that are the worst out here, at least here in this part of the country, are out here on this Interstate 80 between Cheyenne and Rawlins. The winds were terrible out there. They were so bad they almost flipped the Penske truck over at one point. Like one side of the truck actually lifted off the ground a little bit, and I was riding on just the one wheel set on the right side of the truck. Matthew saw it happen in real time. I almost went over. But I was in that thing like driving a boat. I was on that wheel going, "Yar, the seas be rough this day, Captain," trying to adjust the steering wheel to get it back down on the ground, which was a task in itself. But it was crazy stuff. It's crazy stuff out here with the winds. So yes, we do know about them. But a big thanks to you once again. I hope that has addressed that well. And we are on to the next one.
We also have a 5 from Tusker20, who said, "About the North Korean soldier story, I found it funny that Russia never used them, primarily for artillery batteries. The North Koreans know artillery."
Yeah, that is interesting. Maybe they don't know artillery that well. Maybe they're hyped up on that as well. Like, they don't really know how to fire artillery pieces well either, because they don't only get 3 bullets a year for training because they're scared of them revolting. I bet you they're also scared of the artillerymen maybe lobbing a shell at their command somewhere. So that might be possible as well. But a humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that it's addressed that well. And we're on to the next one.
And we also have a 4 from Mark Dixon. And thank you very much, Mark, for that support as well. And also a big shout out to Plazath, who put in a 2. And we appreciate you both, Mark and Plazath, for that support. And also a big shout out to Mama Mentality, who also put in a 2 as well. And we also have a 2 from Bruce Lee, who said Seahawks think they are the biggest bird. Quack.
I'm the biggest bird. I'm the biggest bird. And I gotta say, I thank you so much for the support, and you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Seahawks do think that they're the biggest bird because I think they won the Super Bowl or something like that against the Patriots. I guess Seahawk patriotism is in favor these days. But a huge thanks to you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on and into the next one.
And our next one goes to Mamba Mentality, who puts in a 2 and says, "Give Cuba oil, but just control the quantity."
Oh, well, I mean, you could do that as well. You could, but it's definitely possible that we can say. But a huge thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And with that, folks, that is actually our last Super Chat. So once again, a huge shout out to everybody for once again helping to keep the channel running with that Super Chat support. We do sincerely appreciate it. And it's now time to give thanks to the live chatters as well, throwing in those questions. But first of all, to get to our Morse code decoders, we had Paul, Kevin, Mason, Joni, Norm, Arabelle, Her Royal Fluffiness, Kush, Cobra Tarek, Sire, and Brian Blairstown. They said the Morse says, well, it looks like Russia is going to get beat up now. That's no bueno. LLT, LSA.
And That's the sound of money. Y'all got that dead on the nail. That was the Morse code message of the night. I got to congratulate y'all greatly for getting that correct time and time again. It's truly an amazing and profound thing to know. The Lee Springer Stone Corps is always getting that right, and we're always proud to see that y'all are getting it right. And so with that in mind, everyone, it's time for us to move on and into the live chat questions. We actually have a little bit of time for them here. So, Matthew, what do we got?
So getting into our first one, this one goes to Nick, who said, do you think the U.S. can take Iran with just air power alone?
Yeah, you can actually, you could cripple Iran, but you wouldn't be able to conduct a regime change with air power alone. That would require troops on the ground. So if we're not looking to conduct a regime change, we definitely can. If we're looking to conduct a regime change, that would be woefully inadequate. So I hope that does address that well, and we are on to the next one.
And we also have a question from Snowy, who said, so the USS Bush is not going any more to the region, but instead, it seems like the US is sending the Ford.
Yeah, that's true, actually. That's true. And I got to say, I don't really know what kind of decision's being made here, because I can tell you that I know a guy in the Navy. I talk to him from time to time. And whenever deployments are extended like that, that does nothing for morale. If anything, you're guaranteeing that those people might actually start questioning if they're going to re-enlist when their re-enlistment comes around. And so you might see a lot of those guys leave the Navy, because nobody really likes getting their leave canceled, and also nobody likes the idea of, after 8 months of a deployment on a ship, where you're basically stuck on the ship, then you're going to go for another 4 months, and then it almost becomes a year-long deployment. Like, nobody likes that. And that's why I was saying in prior analysis, I was like, they wouldn't send the Ford because it's 8 months, and if anyone ever gave a damn about the sailors of the Navy, they would not send the Ford. They would just wait for the Bush to end its carrier preparedness drills and then send it instead. But now they're sending the Ford, and that's going to piss a lot of those guys off, especially a lot of the sailors on board that carrier, because they were just looking forward to getting done, going back home, seeing their family, getting some leave before the carrier sets off again. And now they're not going to be getting any of that leave for the next 4 months. I gotta be honest with you, folks. I've been hearing a lot from people that are in the military recently, and no one's liking what's been going on recently. Because for the command to always be talking about everyone needs to care about the soldiers and all that stuff, they treat them like shit. I mean, just to be completely frank. I mean, they don't really care about any of them, and they make it incredibly clear that they don't. And a lot of them are not too happy with it. So retention rates were already bad because of the social policies that are being implemented in the military. Treating them like shit certainly isn't going to improve that. That's for sure. And that's why I was saying we ought to send the Ford back home, so that way those guys can get their leave, instead of sending them on out for another 4 months. But anyways, with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next live chat question goes to Chad, who said, is it not possible that the MOP order was put out due to intentions on dropping a large number soon?
And not really, because it's going to take a while for that bid to be approved, because they have a month in the bidding process, and then it's going to take a couple other months to produce them, and then it might even take a month or two before that to get the assembly line set up to be able to produce the MOPs, because they're not produced on a continuous basis to where an assembly line is ready to go right now to churn a couple of them out. So those MOPs will probably show up a long while from now, maybe even 4 to 6 months, and so they just won't be ready. And from what we know, from the reason why that was placed, it was because they were low on strategic stocks of the GBU-57s, which I would assume is indicating that they never replenished them after they dropped them, and they didn't really have a lot of them. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. And with that, we're on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Ashen, who said, is it possible that one of the reasons for the delays on strikes is to have the CIA or something try to get the protesters ready for a coup?
And I'd have to say that is possible. It is definitely possible. We'll generally have to wait and see on that one. But I hope that does address it the best I can. And also, I saw Lord Cox say the U.S. Navy cannot take 1 year. I did more than a year in Afghanistan with the Army. But the thing about the Army, though, and the thing about most other branches that are not naval related, is that you generally kind of get to goof off and mess around a little bit when you're, not on post. Kind of like Afghanistan, really not the case, but in other instances you could. With the Navy, though, you're basically on the job 24/7 for 8 months straight, and you can't leave the ship, really. And if they ever get leave, which is actually fairly rare from what I hear these days, they give very little shore leave to anyone who's on these ships. So they're basically stuck on the ship for 8 months straight. And, I feel like a lot of people, if you told them, you're going to be stuck on a ship looking out at the ocean every day, and the ocean rarely ever changes unless if the weather's bad, and then if the weather's bad, things are even worse on the ship. And you basically look at the ocean all day, and you're stuck on a ship that's about 500 feet long and about 40 feet wide for 8 straight months. That would drive a lot of people crazy, because Navy life is not easy, especially on ship, from what I've heard from folks who do it. And so that's why they generally try and keep those deployments down to 8 months, which is already fairly long as it is, but extending it another 4 months, you got a bunch of these guys, they're all stuck on this tiny ship in the middle of nowhere, basically doing nothing, doing the same things every day. That is tough psychologically on a lot of them, and that's why the Navy puts a lot into the seafoam green paint job inside of ships to try and make sure that people don't mentally break under the insanity of those sorts of conditions. But with that, we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Avari Mandabradas, who said, so what should the U.S. and NATO do to get rid of the superiority complex and get better?
Just generally start working together again like we have been for decades. That's what I would say. And so with that, I hope that I've addressed it the best I can. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. So who is the lucky last person who threw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is Sean Stevenson, who said, do you think the U.S. will target Iran's Navy fleet and not should will?
Could you reread that one again?
He said, do you think the U.S. will target Iran's Navy fleet? And do you think they will not, or do you think they will?
I would say that they would have to. If we conduct preemptive strikes, we cannot go without striking their Navy. We would have to strike it so that they can't lay mines in the strait. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And so with that, folks, we've reached the end of tonight's stream. I got to thank you all so much once again for watching, and I got to say that it was an absolute honor and a pleasure to be able to run the stream for all of y'all tonight. We had a peak viewership tonight of 14,000 people who were here, and 120,000 people have watched the stream before it ended. I got to thank you all so much once again for watching, and we will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news from around the world. And if there is a short war video to be made, I, the Enforcer, will be the one making that short war video. And so with that, we will see you all then. Good night, good luck, take care, stay safe. Slava Ukraini, Ram Slava. Long live the Lee Spring Army, and long live the Republic.
And with that, folks, we will see you all tomorrow on tomorrow night's live stream at 10 p.m. Eastern, and also maybe on a midday short war video if there is enough news to cover. But honestly, we can't guarantee nothing with that because the news these days at midday has been largely extinct. It usually comes out after we usually make a short war video for the stream. So kind of strange, but it is a lot of news for the stream at least. But we will see you all tomorrow. And a huge shout out to 120,000 plus people that join us by the stream. And we will see you all once again tomorrow. But with that, Slava Ukraine. Slava, get some rest, and good night.